Mr. Higgins for his 5 minutes of question.
Here I am talking. I didn't even notice it said it stopped. I wonder how it stopped. I didn't have any. Anyway, it doesn't matter. MFH Clay Higgins. I already heard this. MFH Clay Higgins is next. And I put him at normal speed. That was really weird. I was like, I wonder how come my chat windows aren't working.
Question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me go see what that is. That's something totally
Mr.
different.
Chairman, our southern border, under the control of Secretary Mayorkas, is 1,954 miles of failure. 10 million illegal crossings in 3 years. The disintegration of American sovereignty, total loss of American law and order, exponential enhancement of cartel human trafficking operations and cartel narcotics trafficking. Millions of American families crushed by financial loss and the unspeakable grief of unprecedented loss of American lives to drugs and violent crime. This is the legacy of Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. And as God is my witness, we will impeach that man in this committee. We will hold him accountable for his colossal failure. And we will take no pleasure in doing so, because it closes the chapter of a disastrous era of American history. We've largely lost our country down there. This body should be discussing sending massive military aid to Texas, not to Ukraine. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, I lost a daughter long ago. It's a club nobody wants to join. And I listened. It was difficult to listen to your testimony, and I read your submitted testimony. And the message that I received is that your daughters are perfected, and they are very, very proud of you both. I promise you, we will hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable and further the administration that he serves. Ms. Nobles, I'm going to ask you to reflect upon a particular policy that the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas pursues. The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services have systems in place to, quote unquote, ensure that unaccompanied alien children from non-contiguous countries are transferred from Customs and Border Protection to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR. But the House Judiciary report regarding your daughter's murder notes that the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, had lost track of more than 85,000 children and placed fewer than 15,000 follow-up calls, not personal visits, after discharging an additional 32,000 children. Now, at no point did anyone under Secretary Mayorkas' command flag the violent criminal that murdered your daughter.
No.
Had a criminal gang history, along with multiple MS-13 tattoos. What would your daughter say about a Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security who facilitates a system that has lost over 100,000 children, mostly young teenage girls? Mrs. Nobles?
Sorry, what was your question?
What would your daughter say about over 100,000 lost teenage children of God? A system run like that.
She would be very, I'm sure she'd be very upset.
Her heart would break for those children, would they not?
Yes.
Americans just like her require action. And that's what this committee will deliver. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, let me thank our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Dunn, Ms. Nobles, I'm also a father, like many of us here, represent an area, a lot of hardworking Americans surviving day to day. My 4 kids were growing up. We invested a lot of time and effort, Little League basketball, keeping them away from that bad stuff. Remember, story, my fellow father, another father in Little League, his kid was a gifted athlete. He was going to be the next major league player. His dad was there every day pitching to him bucket after bucket of baseballs. Then one day, they stopped showing up. Later on, I found out that that young man and his dad started going to drug rehab. That son had come under the spell of hard drugs, and I've never seen him again. Stories like yours, I wish I could say were uncommon in my district, but I've heard them way too many times. Each one that I hear, your story is of pain and suffering. In my district, we lived through heroin addicts, the cocaine surge, crack, PCP, and now fentanyl, the worst of all. This is the reason why all of us here, the federal level, Democrats, Republicans, on both houses, with the president, have to stop bickering, have to stop fighting, come together to protect middle America in this country, ma'am. When it comes to fentanyl, you said Arizona 50%. I'll tell you, I've been to the border, I've talked to our CBP officers. They tell me 65% of all the fentanyl crosses through the San Ysidro port of entry, just one port. It goes north through my county, and that's why we have so many problems in our area. You have one set of numbers, CBP has another set of numbers, but it is a challenge that we have to address. CBP, in 2019, we had seizure of 2,800 pounds. 2019, we had over 27,000 pounds of CBPs seized, 800% increase. But based on those border officers, this is about 10% of what's coming through. They seize about 10%, and 90% probably still gets through. And I've asked those border officers, what do you need to do your job better? You know what they've told me? We need more resources. We need more personnel. When those officers tell me, I'm working 16-hour shifts, we need more personnel, we have to respond with more resources. It's not loot.
Because the personnel
It's the
that
men
you
and
have
women
down
at the
there,
border
sir,
telling
is
us what they
changing
need.
diapers.
So, Professor Perstein, dereliction of duty is not an impeachable offense, correct? The amount of, correct? The amount of seizures at the border, I would say, shows that somebody's doing their job there. It's just a lot. What's better for us to do? Fight over an impeachment or respond
Here
to
we go
President
again.
Biden ask for additional resources at the border? In your opinion?
Impeachment will have no impact on resources available to the border. It will have no impact on the policies pursued by this administration at all. Funding change, the appropriation of money for additional officers, for example, to improve fentanyl seizure operations, based on what you've described, certainly might have any effect, and indeed maybe a good effect. Impeachment has none.
And I've just asked my colleagues here today, let's get it together, surge resources to the border, make sure we stop fentanyl from crossing into our country. Every day that we debate over funding levels is another day that more Americans die from fentanyl. The Chairman, thank you, and I yield.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to rebut a little bit the argument that's been made by my colleagues on the other side that Republicans aren't willing to secure resources for the border. And I'll just tell you that that is a complete, absolute misstatement of fact. In September, the House of Representatives passed an appropriations package for the Department of Homeland Security that appropriated an additional $2 billion.
$2 billion.
Those funds would go to hire additional agents. Those funds would go to merit pay. Those funds would go to invest in additional technology to stop the flow of fentanyl coming into this country. We also passed H.R. 2, which would have done the exact same thing. And so for my colleagues on the other aisle to say we should be more focused on funding DHS and what we're doing here today, I would argue that we have done that. We passed our appropriations bill, we sent it to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer has let that bill sit there, gathering dust, refusing to bring either H.R. 2 or the House Appropriations Bill to the Senate for a vote. And so for them to say that is a complete and utter misstatement of the facts. Professor Pearlstein, I do agree with you in your statement where you said that we do not have to have a violation of the federal criminal code for impeachment, and agree with you when you say serious offenses against public trust would arise to the level of impeachment. Prior to being elected to Congress, I served as a prosecutor in my local community, tried many jury trials. I remember often hearing the judges tell potential jurors that reasonable, good-minded people can reach different conclusions when applying facts to the law. The law in this case, I believe, is the Constitution, the impeachment clause, that we as reasonable members of Congress must apply the facts.
I was like, oh, what happened to my chat? And then I looked inside, it had stopped.
And they may be different than viewed by other members of Congress. Everyone views those using their own perspective. I believe that there is ample evidence. Thank you for finding me again, Mimsy. I believe that Secretary Mayorkas violated his oath to protect and defend the Constitution.
I'm going to try to make a hat.
I believe that Secretary Mayorkas has willfully failed to enforce the law, small. Particularly the INA, where it says repeatedly that the Secretary shall detain and remove immigrants. I believe that Secretary Mayorkas has lied to Congress when he has repeatedly come in and said that the border is secure.
Okay, I want to pause a moment.
I'll tell you an example. Just last year in April.
Okay, so Mimsy, you were around when I was doing the Zachariah Anderson trial rewatch, and I kept losing, like I wouldn't disconnect entirely from live streaming, but I would lose connection with it doesn't matter, I guess, but I did notice that Xfinity here, where I live, now has 2 Wi-Fis, like free Wi-Fis, which we don't use the Wi-Fi, but sometimes if you're out in the yard, I wasn't able to connect with our Wi-Fi. And then if we were having trouble with our Wi-Fi, sometimes we'd, have to go to the Xfinity Wi-Fi to hop on to, send a message to Xfinity to, like, reboot the system. Anyway, hopefully all that's fixed now because of the new modem I just got today. But now that this modem is here, the settings I had with the old modem are outdated. This new modem plus my new computer is too much power. So I think I have to find like the sweet spot in OBS. I know that doesn't make any sense, but to me it does. So, the computer now with the new modem is super fast. But when you upload into like Rumble and Kick and YouTube at the same time, you run like a test, and you almost have to like connect at the lowest possible test or lowest possible port. And I know Rumble today, when I was watching Dan Bongino, their video and audio had a lag in it. So I don't know if that's it, but I looked up on the screen. I'm like, well, what happened to my chat? And then all of a sudden I looked at the bottom and it said, you're not like start streaming. I don't know. So now I have like 3 different windows open as like a security check. But so far so good other than that. But I noticed, okay, so I was explaining about the Xfinity Wi-Fi. I noticed yesterday that we have 2 Xfinity Wi-Fis now. We have one in all caps, and we have one that says Xfinity Wi-Fi in small caps, like the other Wi-Fi. And I noticed that you get them like through the whole house now, where before you'd have to either go outside or go like really close to a window to hop on. So I think they have been tinkering around with it. No, I'm sitting here talking and I'm like trying to figure out why the chat's not popping up on the window. And then I looked and it's the blue light said, or there was no blue. I mean, it's supposed to, it doesn't matter. So now I have the Restream one open that says you are live and it's excellent. So, God. Okay, hopefully that's the end of my problems because I really need to get like back in the swing of things here. Okay. So
Last year, as Secretary Mayorkas came and he sat there where you were sitting, Ms. Dunn, I had the opportunity to ask him, are all 9 sectors of the southwest border secure? And his answer was yes.
Cats?
Now, his answer contradicted the answer given just 3 weeks prior by his chief of border.
So, Mimsy, I'll show you where on my YouTube thing, I have a list. I forget what this hat is. This hat I have memorized, but I got this new super soft, like kind of, you know, taupe and ivory colored marble yarn, but it's a 3 weight, not a 4 weight. So I had to get a little tiny hook, and this is too small, I think, for my big giant arthritic fingers. You have a modem you might have to swap. Yeah, trust me, I tried to baby along that other modem as best as I could, and like the last resort, like yesterday, I was just so frustrated. Because I thought, okay, Fui, I'll just figure something out. And then it's just a long story. So today I thought, okay, fine. I got to suck it up and go just get another one. And then, you know, then you got to call Xfinity and they got to hook it up. And then I was just too excited to wait and see if it would start. And I wanted to watch this. So hopefully we're good. I was going to say, I'll try to find where this pattern is. This is like crocheting in the round. So you just make a magic loop. I could actually write it down. You make a magic loop and then you do 8 double crochets in the loop, close it. And then you do 2 double crochets, so it's 16. I think I have it on my phone. But it's really easy, super easy. And then when you finish it off, it's like, what do they call that? It's like a reverse single stitch, like a crab stitch. So instead of going forward, you go backward, and then that finishes the hat off. The hat I had on the other day on Baker is that pattern. It's super easy. Okay, anyway, here we go.
Patrol Chief Ortiz, when Chief Ortiz said 5 of the 9 sectors on our southwest border are not secure. So I believe he's violated his oath to protect and defend the Constitution. I believe that he has willfully failed to enforce the law, and I believe that he has lied to Congress. Now, Professor, I see in your statement that you provided, you say that really only on 2 occasions, back in 1804 and 1872, where you had the removal of 2 U.S. district judges, where they were removed, one because one was chronically inebriated and the other was mentally incapacitated. And you said that they were unable to carry out their duties because of that. I believe that a person who willfully chooses not to carry out their duties is more impeachable than someone who has some sort of mental inability to do so. And I believe that the record is clear if you look at what this committee has done to show that Secretary Mayorkas has refused to carry those duties out. Now, I want to ask you, because you clearly say in your report, Professor, that you've given, that Congress, that there appears to be no constitutional basis for pursuing this impeachment. My question is relating to a different impeachment matter. Did you feel that way last Congress for the 2 impeachments of President Trump? Did you feel that there was a constitutional basis for the impeachment of Donald Trump, either his first or second impeachment?
I did.
Okay, and so this matter differs in Secretary Mayorkas from.
Mimsy, I just want to ask, you crochet, correct? So when I write it down, you'll understand, you'll pick up what I'm putting down? Question mark.
On both the first and second impeachment of the former president.
Yes,
And in what manner?
several. First, although I've heard now several times the allegation here that Secretary Mayorkas was in some respect violating his legal responsibility, those claims, the specific claims you've raised about detention, enforcement power, were raised and litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court by the state of Texas.
Ms. Berlin, let me ask you,
And the Supreme Court ruled against that argument.
can reasonable people look at the facts and draw different conclusions?
Reasonable people can't draw different conclusions about the law as applied here.
You have to apply the law to the facts. I understand, and I don't believe that there's consensus that your version of what you believe the law is actually
Gentleman's time has
not.
expired.
I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for the purpose of entering something into the record.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a article, Why America is Struggling to Stop the Fentanyl Epidemic, and an article that says how fentanyl crisis, fourth wave, has hit every corner of the United States. Ask unanimous consent to place those in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Before I begin, I want to first personally thank these brave witnesses for being here. Our heart goes out to you and your families for your incredible loss. We all recognize the significance and the importance of this matter. It's been brought to my attention that our chairman, as we speak, is in the hallway doing an interview with Fox News instead of listening to the testimony of these heartbroken parents. I think that demonstrates just where we should be. We should be here, not talking to talking heads and feeding into that. You know, my colleagues have spent the past year blaming Secretary Mayorkas for longstanding issues like immigration, drug addiction, crime, and so forth. However, impeachment over differences in policy is not constitutional. It also solves exactly nothing for the problems that we were sent here to Congress to solve.
Okay, so then,
It's high time that we, as members of Congress, must come together to pass laws that combat fentanyl in our communities and fund drug treatment programs to help save lives, not to determine who has the biggest megaphone or the biggest political voice to exact vengeance. Our job is to serve and to come up with solutions together, Republican and Democrat, to solve our nation's problems. Professor Pearlstein, would impeaching Secretary Mayorkas over policy differences between the Biden administration and House Republicans solve any problems facing our country?
I don't believe it would. The president retains exclusive constitutional power to replace Secretary Mayorkas with another official who he would charge with pursuing exactly the same policies here.
Is it a bit disingenuous to suggest that somehow this is new? The issues that we're facing are new at the border, and somehow that it was perfect before Secretary Mayorkas took over?
My knowledge, just based on Supreme Court cases, of the number of cases that have arisen surrounding executive actions over border policies and reading the history there, suggests that these problems have existed through 5 administrations over decades, largely because Congress has enacted contradictory laws that are impossible to comply with, and multiple administrations have struggled to resolve that contradiction.
Many of the Republicans complain that the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas are not doing enough on immigration, border security, fentanyl, or crime. Professor Pearlstein, does Congress have any role in resolving these longstanding issues? If so, please explain.
Thank you, Representative. As I've mentioned before, Congress has a central role. Indeed, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held, in cases going back more than a century, that Congress's power in this area is plenary, meaning absolute. That is not to say that the executive doesn't retain, under his own Article II authority, enforcement power, but Congress can not only appropriate funds, it can impose conditions on funds, and in the opinion folks are so fond of citing in the recent Supreme Court cases, while impeachment is certainly one power that Congress has, oversight, appropriations, the legislative process, Senate confirmations, withholding funds, and of course, centrally, elections are all tools that are available to Congress and to the American people to effect change here.
And are withholding funds because you are unhappy with the secretary in any way helpful to the issues that these 2 grieving mothers have faced and others may continue to face?
I can't imagine that it is.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter this into the record. Synthetic opioid overdose deaths soared while Trump was president. Not my words. This report of March 2nd, 2023.
Without objection.
Between 2019 and 2020, the last year of Trump's presidency, the increase in drug overdose deaths from synthetic opioid was at 55%. Between 20 and 21, the first year of Joe Biden's presidency, the increase in drug overdose deaths from synthetic opioid was at 25%. Not my words. I'll enter this into the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I will tell you this. This is nothing to be proud of that one president had higher than another, but it is a fact that requires discussion. But it isn't anything to be proud of because if it were just 1%, if it was just one daughter, one son, one child that was impacted by this horrible drug that's in our communities now, that comes across our borders now, not necessarily by immigrants, but primarily by those that are seeking to do harm and to enter the drug trade. What do we do when we strip off our party veils and say, let's fix this issue?
1, 2,
regardless of our
3,
party.
4, 5. Okay.
Let's take away the notion that this one man, Secretary Mayorkas, is this boogeyman. And we send the message to the rest of the world, if we can just get rid of him, all of our problems would go away. It isn't fair, it's disingenuous, it's misleading to the American people. They deserve better, and we can do better. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Pearlstein, do you believe that dereliction of duty is an impeachable offense?
Oops.
The only examples in U.S. history I cited in my testimony, the words dereliction of duty weren't charged. They weren't the articles of impeachment, but those circumstances were where judges, the officers at issue, were either chronically drunk or mentally incapable of performing their duties or both.
Do you believe that failure to uphold your oath to protect the homeland, is that an impeachable offense?
I don't believe that anybody has ever been impeached for a failure.
I didn't ask the question. I said, do you believe that somebody who fails to uphold their oath to protect the homeland, is that an impeachable offense?
I believe that somebody who acts in his own interests or the interests of gaining his own power or in the interests of a foreign power is impeachable.
So you don't think that somebody who fails to uphold the oath to protect the homeland and does it in a way that's a dereliction of duty, you don't believe that that's impeachable? That somehow Congress doesn't have the right to exercise its power of impeachment to remove that individual who is clearly violating his oath and is derelict in his duty? You don't think that Congress can do that?
I don't know that there's evidence here of dereliction of
I
duty.
didn't say if there's evidence. I'm not asking evidence. Ma'am, I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time. I'd like for you to answer my question, not your question. Okay, my question is very specific. I didn't say about this case. I'm just talking in general. All right?
In general, depending on the circumstances, depending on the violation of the Constitution, it's conceivable, yes.
Okay, so if we determine that Mr. Mayorkas is derelict in his duty and has failed to uphold his oath to protect the homeland, in our opinion, okay, then is that an impeachable offense?
Again, dereliction of duty is different from failure to comply with the oath, right? To the extent the oath,
I said
a
both.
variety of
I
things.
said both. So,
Well, they're two different legal arguments.
I said both. Okay.
So I've addressed the
You can be,
question
can't you be guilty of doing two things at the same time?
I've addressed the impeachability of dereliction of duty.
Okay,
The
very
question
good.
of the oath is something separate. To the extent it raises an allegation of a violation of the Constitution, it is potentially impeachable, but here the Supreme Court has rejected that argument.
I don't believe they have, but anyway, I'll move on. Is a violation of law, is that when an individual clearly violates the law, is that an impeachable offense? Depending on the law, I guess, right? I mean, how serious that law is that your interpretation?
Impeachment, right, is only about a certain category of offenses. It only addresses a certain category of offenses. It has to be an offense similar to treason or bribery, that is, an offense against the system of government, not any ordinary criminal offense, something that disrupts the structure of the Constitution or our system of government.
Very good. Okay, thank you. So, allowing millions and millions of people to come into the United States, violating the clear intent of Congress when it says that in order to be paroled into the United States, it has to be done on a case-by-case basis, and you do it on a mass basis. That actually may have something, may affect the land. It may affect the structure of government. I would argue that, and so I guess it's up to the Supreme Court to determine that eventually. Now, Ms. Dunn. Let me say that I feel deeply for you and your loss. Actually, in my extended family, we had the same kind of loss due to fentanyl. Do you believe that the multinational criminal organizations, the cartels, that are working across the border, do you believe that they are terrorist organizations, for lack of a better word?
Yes, sir, I do.
And they're guilty of mass murder?
Yes, sir, I do believe that.
And I do too. And I believe also one of the things that Mr. Mayorkas has shown to be derelict in his duty is the absolute failure of this administration to combat what I consider to be terrorist organizations, which are the Mexican drug cartels that control the border. And by the way, I also believe the Biden administration is actually helping those organizations by not stemming the flow of illegal immigration. They are enriching those multinational organizations to the tune of billions of dollars, which allows them to produce more fentanyl, which allows them to kill tens of thousands of American citizens. And so for that, too, I believe that Mr. Mayorkas has failed miserably in his duty to protect the homeland. And with that, my time has expired, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Magazine. Mr. Thanadar is recognized for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank all of our witnesses here today. My sincere condolences to our witnesses. As a father and a grandfather, I sympathize with your unimaginable loss. As a member of Congress, I realize it is my duty and my colleagues' duty to do all we can to prevent tragedies like this from impacting our communities. That is why one of my first acts as a freshman member of Congress was introducing an amendment to the Republicans' H.R. 2 border bill, which they are now threatening to shut the government down over, which aimed to bolster the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to combat cross-border threats posed by transnational criminal organizations. This
Mimsy, I'm going to look and see if I can find the actual pattern. But this, I mean, this hat here is also the same pattern. I mean, it's super simple, very easy. Okay. I mean, I have to do I have to do some stuff while I sit here and watch these, and I don't know. Crocheting is just so therapeutic.
amendment which would have strengthened DHS' ability to combat organizations engaging in criminal activity, such as drug trafficking and human smuggling, was voted down by every single Republican member. Sitting in this hearing room today and on this committee. While Republicans voted this and every other Democratic amendment down, I know enacting meaningful legislation is needed to address the issues at the southern border. That's why I have introduced the United Against Transnational Criminal Organizations Act. Several of my Democratic colleagues on this committee have signed on to this bill, which directs DSS to take a range of actions to combat illicit criminal cartel activity that undermines our homeland security. The bill directs DHS to establish a joint task force bringing together multiple agency components to conduct operations to combat cross-border threats posed by TCOs and organizations engaged in the trafficking of fentanyl and its materials across the land border of US. This bill directs DHS to establish an integrated border intelligence analytical cell to improve information sharing regarding the concentrated surge of migration, smuggling, and trafficking. And since we know a vast amount of fentanyl is trafficked through our ports of entry, it requires DHS to issue a strategy to improve the effectiveness of the screening of vehicles, persons, and cargo at land ports of entry that are at high risk of being related to transnational criminal organizations. My question to you, Professor Poston, would you agree that a legislation such as my United Against Transnational Criminal Organizations Act is a more effective measure to solving the issues at our border versus impeaching a secretary over policy differences?
It. It's called Easy Beanie
Thank
Crochet.
you, Mr. Thanadar. Again, I'm not an immigration policy expert, but The bill that you propose is certainly
I will add
within
a
Congress's
link.
power to enact.
I can
It may
open
have an
it.
effect on immigration policy. Impeachment will have no effect on immigration policy.
Thank you.
Easy beanie
And
crochet.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
That's the pattern. I've only made like
Gentleman yields.
probably
The gentleman
50
from
of these.
Texas, Mr. Pfluger, is recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
No,
Thank
not
you, Mr.
that
Chair.
many. Like
Ms. Nobles and Ms. Dunn, I'm so sorry for your loss. We can't even fathom the loss that you've gone through. And your courage to be here, to speak out, to bring
here, I found
light
it.
to the
Found
situation,
it.
to speak the truth
Super
is
easy.
not only commended, but it's necessary so that we avoid this pain.
Okay, so for those of you watching the House Committee hearing, I am listening to it, but you know, for those of you who crochet, it's just, this is just like the perfect coziness. Watching this with friends, sharing in your outrage, and curled up in a, you know, recliner with your crochet or knit. So, but I had just, I don't know, maybe like the beginning of December or like right around Thanksgiving, maybe, I had decided to venture into doing a hat because I hadn't crocheted in like years. And this is the first one I did. And then it's just like really easy to memorize. There's also a messy bun hat, but I have like the size head of like a small child. So here's the pattern. So the messy bun beanie, I've made a few of those, but I haven't quite figured out the right. There, that's it. See, same exact hat. I think actually that one calls for a half double. And it's, I only use one strand of number 4. Although I'm trying to make it with this number 3 and a smaller hook. I'm not sure how well that's going to go. But I use not a J hook, I use an I hook and number 4. And that's this hat, was an I hook and number 4. So it's, I mean, it's, you know, it's not super dense. I think actually the pattern calls for half double, but this is I like double crochets. Yep, that's it. Oh no, it does say double crochet. So there, now you have it. I should maybe save that. Okay, we're good. That's exactly this hat. Okay. Now back
And
to
for
our
other
show.
families. Thank you for being here.
Oh, and Mimsy, I was going to say, if you switch it into reader mode, if you're on your mobile device, depending on what you use, if you use an Apple product, just switch it to reader view and then export it into iBooks. And then it reads just like a book.
Professor Pearlstein, are you familiar with the William Belknap case that you mentioned in your testimony? Are you you're intimately familiar with it as a constitutional law expert?
I'm generally familiar with the Belknap impeachment, yes.
You wrote about it in your testimony, correct?
I did, yes.
Is there a reason that you left out the fact that Article 3 of that impeachment case mentioned the disregarding of his duty as Secretary of War?
No.
Was it particularly helpful to your argument today?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Was there a reason you left that out?
I wasn't giving a full book report on the Belknap impeachment.
Okay.
I was mentioning it in my testimony.
No, that's fine.
As the only other instance in U.S. history in which Congress has ever
Right,
thought
in
it
Article
worth the
3
time
of that, thank you, that's the only other history.
impeach a
What we're
cabinet
talking about
officer.
is unprecedented, disregarding of his duty. I'm going to quote you. There, the professors were reasonably uniform in recognizing that it doesn't have to be a crime. That is to say, an impeachable offense doesn't have to be a crime as currently embodied in the Federal Criminal Code as enacted by Congress. What they were thinking about
what
with the
does this say
impeachment
here?
remedy were serious offenses against the public trust. That is, certain things that only the president and other senior officials could do that abuse their authority. Did you in fact say this with regards to the Trump impeachment?
I've said many things about impeachment. It's entirely possible that I said that, and I would still agree with it, actually.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to insert for the record Professor Pearlstein's comments on a radio show in New York on a podcast in 2019 regarding the Trump administration's.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. So do you believe, will you define impeachment with regards to the public trust as you said it there with regards to Trump? If the public trust is broken, is that an impeachable offense?
Public trust in this context refers to two kinds of breaches of the public trust generally. One is an official who is acting in his own personal interest, right, to aggrandize his own political wealth interests, power, et cetera, as opposed to the interests of the American people. That's an example of a breach of the public trust. The other is if an official is acting on behalf of a foreign power, which is another example of a breach of a public trust. Yes. And I thought those issues were both implicated in the Trump-Ukraine impeachment.
Do you believe that public trust has been broken with regards to the common defense of our country?
As a general matter,
The collective defense of our country?
as a general matter, I'm not sure I can answer that question that broadly stated. Has the public, I'm not aware of any evidence, for example, the Secretary Mayorkas has been acting for his own personal wealth or aggrandizement.
That's fine, but in general, is breaking the public trust in an egregious manner grounds for an impeachment proceeding?
In the way I just defined breaking the public trust, that is acting on behalf of one's own interests as opposed to the interests of the public, yes, that can be an impeachable ground if there is evidence of that.
Doesn't work.
Are
I tried
you,
to send you the
licensed in a
immersive
state?
reader. It won't work.
Am I a member of the bar, do you mean?
The bar, yeah.
Yes, I'm a member of the Bar of the State of California, and I'm a member of the Bar of Washington, D.C.
Is it your responsibility to uphold the laws in those states in which you are a member of the bar?
I have all of the same ethical obligations that any attorney has.
When you take the oath of office as a cabinet member to well and faithfully execute the duties of the office, does that infer a responsibility to uphold the laws as well?
Anybody who takes an oath to take care that the laws are faithfully executed has an oath to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, yes.
Did you condemn the attacks by Hamas on Israel?
I'm not sure what that has to do with anything.
It's a question. Did you condemn the attacks?
My personal view of those attacks is that they were abhorrent. I don't think I've had occasion to speak about it publicly. It's not my area of expertise.
Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Magaziner for the gentleman from Rhode Island for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for having the courage to share their stories and their expertise today. We have real challenges at the border. I've been there, I've seen it, and I know that the American people are counting on Congress to act. Unfortunately, too many of my Republican colleagues are more focused on playing politics instead of working together to address our problems. The Biden administration has requested $14 billion to secure the border, funding that would hire more than 1,300 Border Patrol agents and more than 1,000 CBP officers. House Republicans have refused to call a vote on this funding for nearly 4 months. They have sat on this proposal for nearly 4 months, undercutting their claim that they really care about border security. If you care about it, call a vote. And if you don't like all of the proposal, call a vote on the parts that you do like. When House Republicans were asked why they won't call a vote on the president's border funding request, one of them said, quote, "Let me tell you, I'm not willing to do too damn much right now to help a Democrat and to help Joe Biden's approval rating." That tells you all you need to know. He was more concerned about Joe Biden's approval rating than about fixing the problems at the border. And he's not the only one. Laura Ingraham on Fox News said that Republicans should not accept any border deal because it would be, quote, "a victory for Biden." Even Speaker Johnson has openly mused that House Republicans will not accept more border funding until there is a Republican president. Now, some of my colleagues say, well, funding's not enough. We need policy changes at the border, too. Okay. Over the last month, through the holidays, Secretary Mayorkas has been working diligently with Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats to try to come up with a policy plan for the border. Where have House Republicans been in those talks? MIA, not participating. They gave themselves a vacation for a month. Well, imagine if the reverse were the truth. Imagine if House Republicans were actually working with the Senate on a border plan and Secretary Mayorkas decided to go on vacation for a month. What would people say about that? Instead, this phrase, dereliction of duty, gets thrown around a lot. It is my House Republican colleagues who have been derelict in their duty. They have refused to call a vote on border funding for 4 months. They have refused to participate in the talks with the Secretary and the Senate to put a border plan together. What have they been doing instead? Playing politics.
Of the illegals. You're not
they passed a budget plan, the so-called Limit, Save, Grow Act, which would have cut the Department of Homeland Security by 22%, eliminating 2,000 CBP officers at the border. Every one of them voted for that. When the Biden administration requested $84 million to help states and cities with the costs associated with migration, House Republicans instead cut it to $0. Some House Republicans have openly called for shutting down the government this week, even though they know
I forgot
that
that
means
one.
that Border
The
Patrol
government
agents who are
shutdown. They
already
used that one
overworked
last
and
week,
underpaid
too.
would be forced to work without any pay at all.
We're almost out
and
of
now
money.
they are playing politics with impeachment, even though there is no legal basis for impeaching the secretary. I've heard that this is going to be our final impeachment hearing. And still, House Republicans have yet to clearly articulate what laws they think the secretary has broken. They have not brought in a single legal expert who is willing to put up their hand and under oath state that there is a sound legal basis for impeachment. The best they could do last week was a handful of Republican politicians. They invited the secretary to appear in a hearing to defend himself against their ambiguous charges. And then when he sent a letter back on January 11th saying that he would appear, they reneged on his invitation and disinvited him. But the sad thing about these political games is that this is wasted time. This is time that we could be spending to work together on real solutions for the border, real solutions to solve the fentanyl crisis, real solutions to combat the cartels and create a safe and orderly system at the border. Senate Democrats are working on it as we speak. Senate Republicans are working on it as we speak. The Secretary is working on it as we speak. And it is only House Republicans who are putting politics ahead of doing the work to solve our problems. Professor, for those of us who are serious about trying to improve the situation at the border, is impeachment Congress's most effective tool to do it, or are there other powers that Congress has that would be better suited to fixing the situation at the border?
Thank you, Congressman. As I've said, impeachment in this context will have no effect on administration or American border policy. Congress has a host of tools at its disposal, as the Supreme Court recently listed, and as I've testified to, including, of course, appropriations, oversight hearings, the legislative process, Senate confirmations, withholding funds, and then, of course, as I've mentioned before, elections. There are others as well.
Thank you, Professor. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. We're going to take a 10-minute break to give our witnesses an opportunity to take a break, and we will reconvene at, we'll say 11:40. The committee is adjourned, or is in recess.
So normally when I do these subcommittee hearings, I do them, you know, like when they're in progress. And again, because of aforementioned repeated problems over the last several weeks with internet.
Come to order.
And finally, my frustration yesterday.
Get seated and get going there. That'd be great. Members who are tying up our witnesses.
Address that situation, which so far so good, other than that one accidental disconnection. You know, I might have actually hit it with my mouse when I went to go do something. Anyway,
this is a very important
Committee will come to order. I now recognize the gentlelady
now.
from Georgia, Mrs. Green, for her 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So far today on this very important historic hearing, we've listened to Democrats complain that Republicans have done nothing to stop the border security crisis, pretending that we didn't pass H.R. 2, the strongest border bill that has ever been passed in Congress. All of our Democrat colleagues voted no to that bill. My Democrat colleagues today are complaining that they need more money. Well, it seems to be from listening on this committee most of the time, they want more money to help more migrants come into the country. It's unfortunate that it's about migrants. It should be about Americans. I've also listened to them talk about impeachment, talking about impeachment, saying that impeachment is not the right thing to do when it comes to Secretary Mayorkas complaining about impeachment hearings. But I'd like to remind everyone that when they impeached President Trump, they introduced articles of impeachment on January 11th, held 0 hearings, and then passed these articles of impeachment on January 13th. Oh my, the hypocrisy. But let's talk a little bit further. Let's talk about something I heard from one of our witnesses today, saying that impeachment is needed or necessary or warranted when this person has acted in the interest of a foreign power, that's an impeachable offense. Well, let's talk about how we could argue Secretary Mayorkas has definitely acted for a foreign power. Former special agent for DEA's Special Operations Division testified under oath that the cartels have control over the United States southern border. The cartels, not our government, not our border patrol. That's a foreign power. Cartels and coyotes are making around $13 billion a year in human trafficking alone off Joe Biden's open border policies and Secretary Mayorkas's willful disobedience in his job. The revenue is 26 times more than cartels earned under President Trump. 26 times more. That would definitely be helping a foreign power. I'm sure that money's spent in countries like Mexico. That helps their economy. Cartels control approximately 40% of Mexico. The cartels do. That means that this border crisis and the laws that are being broken are definitely in the interest of a foreign power. Now, we're also hearing a debate back and forth about policy. Is it a policy difference, or is it Secretary Mayorkas's disobedience and his willfulness to break our federal laws? I ask that question because I want to know, is it the Biden administration's policy to kill 300 Americans every single day to fentanyl? Is it the Biden administration's policy that cartel members are allowed to come in our country and are released? These are unaccompanied minors. Are they allowed by the Biden administration's policy to come in the country and rape and murder young women? Is it the Biden administration's policy for nearly 100,000 unaccompanied minor children to go missing in our country? Is it the Biden administration's policy for child labor, migrant child labor that was talked about in the New York Times? Is that the Biden administration's policy? If so, then maybe we shouldn't be having hearings on my articles of impeachment to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Maybe we should be holding articles of impeachment on the President of the United States. Is that where we're going? What do you think about that, Ms. Pearlstein? Do you think, is it a policy difference, or is it Secretary Mayorkas? Which one, Biden, Joe Biden, or Secretary Mayorkas?
My impression of the allegations that the majority has raised here is that they are entirely about policy differences with
Ms. Pearlstein, you've talked about policy in your testimony today. Policy. So that would be Joe Biden. I'm sure you voted for him for president. You've been talking about the Biden administration's policy has been the cause of all of this. So is it Joe Biden's policy, the administration's policy, or is it Secretary Mayorkas?
The Constitution, no matter which official.
Ms. Pearlstein asked you a question. Is it the Biden administration or is it Secretary Mayorkas? Not the Constitution. We're not talking about the Constitution. Is it the Biden administration's open border policies, or is it Secretary Mayorkas breaking federal law? One or the other, because the statistics are clear. Are you capable of answering that question?
I'm not sure. Those were about 4 questions.
No, it's one or the other. Biden administration, open border policies, or Secretary Mayorkas.
One or the other what? Who caused it?
That has caused 300 Americans to die every single day. These 2 women sitting next to you's daughters have been murdered. We're talking about over 100,000, nearly 100,000 unaccompanied minors missing in this country. We're talking about cartel members everywhere, the cartel controlling the southern border. We're talking about the massive increase in statistics. It's either one or the other. It's either the Biden administration's open border policies or it's Secretary Mayorkas.
Ma'am, I'm
okay, we'll take
constitutional law.
No, you can't point to the Constitution.
All right, so we're a little over here. Gentlelady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Mr. Ivey for his 5 minutes question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off, we're going to show a clip from an interview that involved former Secretary Chertoff, and I wanted to play that now, if we can.
I'd like for you both very quickly to weigh in on what happens if the Republican-led Congress goes ahead with this vow to impeach or try to impeach the current Secretary of Homeland Security. Does that mean all the things you suggested don't happen and Congress is just tied in knots? Secretary Chertoff?
Well, it would be a very sad day if, in search of what is, again, a political stunt, threatening to impeach Secretary Mayorkas, Congress didn't do the things, for example, that Secretary Johnson just suggested. Maybe adjust the standard with respect to asylum, create more resources that are available to adjudicate, and work out additional ways to fund the effort to undermine the cartels and the smugglers, which are a big part of this. So it would be basically putting form over substance to go through a big performance on impeachment that's never going anywhere, rather than actually working with the administration to solve the problem.
Thank you. And then shortly after that, former Secretary Johnson said, we can't have a secretary who's distracted by a stunt in Congress and attempted impeachment. Similarly, we've had other quotes, I think from Congressman Ken Buck, a Republican congressman, who's raised similar concerns about, well, who stated basically there's no grounds for impeachment. Also, Professor Jonathan Turley, who testified, and Turley's important here because he's the witness that the Republicans called to testify at the oversight hearing that Ms. Green, I think, was referencing with respect to President Biden. And he said that, at that hearing, that there was no evidence to impeach President Biden. He sent us a letter to this committee saying the same thing with respect to Secretary Mayorkas. Thanks. So I want to sort of point out a couple of things here with respect to
Oh, please
that.
do. Why don't we bring out some of
To the
those?
extent we've had hearings that
whiteboards?
have discussed this issue of impeachment, from a legal standard, from a constitutional standpoint, the only witnesses who've actually addressed it directly are Professor Bowman, who testified at the last hearing, and Professor Pearlstein, who's testifying today. There's no testimony to the contrary that they've provided that was given by the witnesses that the Republicans have called. And I suggest that that's in part, or maybe in whole, because they don't have experts who will come in and say, legal experts, constitutional scholars who are experienced with respect to impeachment, who will come here and raise their right hand and swear under oath that the Constitution justifies impeachment with respect to Secretary Mayorkas in this case. And the absence of the testimony the ranking member raised due process issues at the beginning of the hearing, I would suggest that this goes to the heart of it. If there's no evidence that the Republicans have presented about actual impeachment, the standard in the Constitution being violated, we should not be moving forward with impeachment under these circumstances. I also note Professor Pearlstein's testimony, the point about even if you don't like the policies that Secretary Mayorkas is implementing, and you impeach him and the Senate removes him, which they're not gonna. We've already heard from senators over there who've said, you're wasting the time, let's focus on actual legislation that they're trying to work out and get done. But even if you remove him, President Biden's just going to move up the acting administrator, I suppose, acting secretary, who would continue to implement the same policy. So it's a waste of time, as Secretary Chertoff called it. It's a political stunt. But more importantly, I mean, it is a total distraction from actually trying to get the legislation done. It's hard to ignore the fact that the Senate is having bipartisan negotiations on the behalf of the Democrats and the Republicans to try and pass a bill or put together a bill that would address these issues. The White House is working with them. House Democrats are working with them. Only the House Republicans are no-shows. They did the field trip to the border and did the photo op and sent it back. But they haven't decided to move forward with actually fixing the issues on that front. And just the last point I'll make on that front, H.R. 2, there's a lot of talk about that's been passed and it's sitting on the Schumer's desk, but it's not on his desk, it's in the trash can. And you know what? It's in McConnell's trash can too. And they said that before it was passed through. They said, you got all these poison pill provisions in here. We're not going to move this. Send us something we can actually work with. You didn't, so now they're trying to put a bill together. And everybody's on board with that effort except House Republicans. So if we really want to get something done, let's all come together and work on it so we can pass legislation that addresses the problem. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Ezell, the gentleman from Mississippi, for his 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all to our witnesses today for being here and providing this important information that we need. Ms. Nobles, thank you for joining us here today. And I can't imagine how tough it is, must be discussing this over and over again about the Mayorkas failed border security policy. I genuinely appreciate you sharing the challenging stories and emphasizing the importance of border security. Americans are demanding we do something. With over 40 years in law enforcement, including as a sheriff, I truly understand how challenging it is to ensure the safety of our communities. I never stopped, slowed down, or prevented my officers from enforcing the law. I swore an oath to protect the citizens of my community. Somehow, Secretary Mayorkas is making this tough job even tougher for our men and women of Border Patrol. Ms. Nobles, a report from the House Judiciary Committee pointed out several failures in vetting your daughter's killer when he crossed the border. The report showed your daughter's murderer was arrested for associations with MS-13 long before he came to the United States, something that could have been verified with a simple phone call. But our members of Border Patrol are not being allowed to do their jobs. They told me this personally when we were down there last year. Instead, they're nursemaiding and making sandwiches for criminals while all this stuff goes on.
Changing diapers.
The buck stops at the top. This could have immediately disqualified this killer from getting in the country had they been able to do their jobs, but they have been hired to do. The report also noted that he was released after he was arrested for murder. Ms. Nobles, do you have any reason to believe that Secretary Mayorkas has taken these reports seriously?
No, he hasn't.
To me, the reports are clear. His policies are failing. Do you believe he's trying to change the process of the vetting illegal aliens coming across our border?
No, if he was, then my daughter would still be here today if they did their jobs. They did not do their jobs.
It's no secret how gruesome and violent the cartels are. I've seen it personally myself. In many cases, they're even better armed than local law enforcement. In your opening statement, you quote, "This isn't about immigration. This is about protecting everyone in the United States of America." Again, the American citizens are demanding that we take action. Ms. Nobles, do you believe that Secretary Mayorkas' policies are strengthening the cartels? Do you believe that his policies are strengthening the cartels? No mother or father should ever have to endure hearing chilling news that their child has been a victim of such a violent, heinous crime. Unfortunately, as a sheriff, I have delivered these devastating news to families. It's one of the most difficult things you'll ever do as a law enforcement officer. To end, I will simply ask, do you believe this crisis has been created by the Biden administration's policies?
Yes.
Thank you again, and thank you all for being here today. We will continue to be your voice. We will continue to take action. And no matter what the other side says, we're going to do something to stop this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez, the gentlelady from Illinois, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. I want to begin by acknowledging the losses here today. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, I am grieved that you have endured losing your daughters, Kayla Marie and Ashley. No parent should ever have to go through this loss. No parent. I also want to acknowledge the losses that are not described today. I want to name a couple of those. Victorma de la Sancha Cerros, 33-year-old
Don't go
mother.
down the same path as Sheila
Yorley
Jackson
Ruby,
Lee
10
did.
years old. And Jonathan Agustin Briones de la Sancha, 8 years old. They lost their lives when cruel policy choices and willful obstruction of intergovernmental coordination by the Abbott administration in Texas kept Border Patrol agents from responding to rescue a drowning mother and her children.
That was debunked.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter these 2 articles into the record.
Dan Bongino today addressed the situation, the mother and children. That has been debunked. I mean, they did die, but it's not going to be by the means that she's going to assert here.
3 migrants, including 2 children, drowned near the Texas border, and an 8-year-old migrant died after a week in U.S. detention.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Anadit Reyes Alvarez, an 8-year-old who passed away on May 2023 at a CBP detention facility in Texas when medical staff failed to review her medical documentation and provide
she's going
access to a
down the
physician
dark
in
path
emergency care.
again.
There are so many examples of the consequences of cold disregard for our shared humanity in the absence of compassion. There's just so much pain. And it's across our communities, immigration statuses, political identities, when it comes to the humanitarian crisis within our borders and the cost of congressional inaction. You see, I just got back from Guatemala, where I heard painful stories that underline the need to act beyond our borders to address the root causes of migration. What causes a 9, a 12-year-old to cross all of Guatemala, all of Mexico, in hope to get to our southern border? What do we do to create legal pathways? And how do we understand the root cause of migration? I heard about children who are hungry, impoverished, desperate to meet the needs of their families, willing to leave villages, cross jungles, deserts, and rivers, and die in the Rio Grande just to make it to the U.S. I heard about the pain and trauma of separation, isolation, detention, and deportation. I saw how corruption, corporate land grabs, environmental destruction and disaster, democratic backsliding create conditions that drive migration. Pain that shows us where healing is needed. The pain that was shared with me in Guatemala requires healing that could be advanced by congressional action. Congressional action that addresses and prepares for climate migration, invests in economic development of Latin American countries, modernizes legal pathways to citizenship, strengthens democracy, and combats corruption in Latin America. You see, the pain of Anadit's death requires healing that could be advanced by congressional action, like establishing humanitarian standards at CBP sites, granting immigration parole, improving adjudicatory processing capacity, or increasing personnel to reduce USCIS backlogs. The pain of Victorma, Yorley, and Jonathan's death requires healing that could be advanced by congressional action. We could increase board personnel to expand screening and assistance to new arrivals. The pain of families trafficked by Abbott must be addressed by implementing federal coordination and resettlement to interior cities, expanding work permits. To heal, we have to actually talk about comprehensive immigration reform and have a conversation. Why are thousands of people wanting to cross our southern border? Professor Prosting, the testimonies we heard today show how critical it is that we take policy action. Yes or no?
I think these policies are of enormous pressing public importance, yes.
And just for the record, for the 10th time maybe, if impeachments are not an instrument for affecting policy changes, is there a legitimate basis for this impeachment, yes or no?
I don't believe the Constitution supports impeachment in this case.
Thank you. You see, Republicans are not interested in advancing policy change. If they were, they would stop these impeachment hearings and work with us to pass legislation. Even one of the many things I talked about, sit down with us and actually work on it. But according to Speaker Johnson, Congress can't solve border until Trump is elected or Republican is back in the White House. I mean, think about how politicized this moment is.
Oh, shut up.
They are parading our parade for their political purposes. Enough. As I said, if we are serious about this process and this solution, we would be capable to respect people's humanity and move us to a collaborative approach where our neighboring countries were able to address the root cause, keep communities safe, and honor the very fabric of our multiracial, multicultural democracy. That's what we'd be doing today. Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, and I yield back with hope.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. D'Esposito, the gentleman from New York, for his 5 minutes question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses this morning. It seems that the other side of the aisle is talking about making this impeachment about politics. And I will tell you that this has absolutely nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the American people. Ms. Pearlstein, you mentioned in the recording that our chairman played that the founding fathers talked, and what they described in the Constitution is not what we focus on right now always. You, quote, said, serious offenses against the public trust could lead to an impeachment. So, Mrs. Dunn, do you believe
Correct, ma'am,
that
Missy.
what has occurred and what happened to your daughter and other teenagers and Americans throughout this country just like her, do you believe that that is a serious offense against the public trust?
Yes, my border not being secure is a serious offense. Other legislators worried about other people from other countries instead of my own is a serious offense. I take great offense to that. I think you need to be worried about us.
Thank you. And Ms. Nobles, the same question. Do you feel
America first.
that what happened to your daughter and the crimes that have been committed against Americans by individuals who have illegally crossed our border, do you think that those are serious offenses against the public trust?
Yes, definitely.
So Secretary Mayorkas and his failed border policies have placed all Americans in danger. Every state is a border state, and every state has seen the impact of the crisis at our southern border. It's what we've outlined over the 5 phases in this committee. Proud to be a retired NYPD detective, having spent a career upholding my oath to protect and serve the places that I kept safe. That solemn oath is now that much harder for law enforcement throughout this country, have been put on the front lines of this crisis as a direct result of the failed policies of Secretary Mayorkas. As I just stated, every state is a border state. And Ms. Nobles, your daughter was tragically murdered in Maryland, well over 1,000 miles
I'm in Minnesota.
from the southern border. I know that the man who murdered your daughter was a well-known MS-13 gang member. In 2018, President Trump came to Long Island with then Congressman Peter King to discuss MS-13 and the heinous crimes they commit both on Long Island and throughout this country. You see, back...
Do you guys remember that one, what was it? State of the Union address? I think it was President Trump's first one, and there was 2 couples there. Their daughters had both died from MS-13. Did you know the one of the mothers was actually killed like 6 months later? I think also by like some kind of gang.
Then we had an administration
Out of New
who
York.
actively worked to find solutions to the issues occurring at our southern border.
I'll have to find
They
that.
worked with law enforcement to make sure that
Heartbreaking.
they had the tools necessary to protect and serve their communities. And now we have Secretary Mayorkas who have put all Americans in danger. In Nassau County, we have identified 271 MS-13 members. Ms. Nobles, do you believe that Secretary Mayorkas has taken adequate measures to ensure MS-13 members and other members of criminal organizations are not able to enter this nation illegally?
No, absolutely not.
Ms. Dunn, just this morning, I spoke with Commissioner Pat Ryder, who's the commissioner of the Nassau County Police Department. My district, well over thousands of miles from the southern border, is still seeing dozens of overdoses each week with drugs flowing from our southern border. We know that it takes an incredibly small amount of fentanyl to kill someone and harm families and communities. Do you know the amount of fentanyl that killed your daughter?
To the left
Sir,
side.
my daughter used 1/2 of one tablet that she believed was Percocet. In that 1/2 of one tablet, there was 5 milligrams of fentanyl, enough to kill 2.5 people.
2.5 people
To the
in
left
5
of
milligrams.
your screen
Yes.
is how
And
much
since
fentanyl
Mayorkas
in
has been the
comparison
Secretary
to
of
a
Homeland
penny
Security,
will kill an
25
adult human.
billion milligrams of fentanyl has come across our southern border and unfortunately has killed many others tragically, just like your daughter.
Yes.
It is very clear that America and the people who live here are at risk. And Secretary Mayorkas deserves to be impeached because he has committed serious offenses against the public trust of the United States of America. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yield. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman, for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I thank our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Nobles and Ms. Dunn,
Takes a tiny
I just want to
amount.
express
Yeah, just
my
a
sincere
little-
condolences. I was
just
a
that
federal
little
prosecutor
pinch.
for 10 years who charged people for gang-related and drug trafficking crimes. Unfortunately, this is
you
not the
remember
first
that
time I've
State
had
of
to
the
interact
Union.
with families
Yeah.
of victims,
I think
and
it was his
my heart
first
goes out to
one.
you. And I just want to apologize in some ways to you that you are here really to share your story, but you're being used as a fact witness for an impeachment
He's actually
investigation.
gonna go there. He's
And
gonna
obviously,
assert that they're being
given
used.
what your experience has been, you
bet
don't
the lady
have the background
I bet the lady
to
in the middle is
understand
gonna have a
what a high crime misdemeanor
fit.
is and how it relates to this. And so I hope that you're handling that okay. One of the things that the chairman said at the beginning of his opening statement was that he wishes that Democrats would turn our sympathy into action, and quite ironically said thoughts and prayers are not enough. At first, I thought we were at a gun violence hearing where we were talking about the repeated thoughts and prayers of the 2 mass shootings that happen every day. But I do want to just go through some of the actions, as the chairman pointed out, turn sympathy into action.
Anymore, really.
Because I assume, Ms. Dunn, you would agree, would you not, that it would help to stop the fentanyl trade and fentanyl trafficking from coming into this country if we had more law enforcement officers at the border and more resources and technology to stop the fentanyl from coming in? Do you agree with that?
I disagree with that because Border Patrol is now being used to make sandwiches and to screen people
See,
and
I
let
knew
them
it.
into
I
our
knew it.
country.
I
Okay,
knew
well,
it.
So I disagree with you.
So you're saying that you're saying that you're upset because the Border Patrol is not doing is making sandwiches, I think you said. So you don't think it would be helpful to have more Border Patrol officers who are charged with stopping the fentanyl trade?
I would like the Border Patrol to be able to do the job that they were hired to do.
Well,
Every Border Patrol officer that I have spoken to has told me that their hands are tied by this administration and Mr. Mayorkas. I've been to the border, sir. Have you? Have you?
Excuse me, I'm asking the question.
I'm just wondering.
And the problem with that is that in Congress, this Congress, we have interviewed 9 senior officials under DHS in a variety of different capacities. Every single one of them has said that it would be helpful to provide more resources at the border to stop the flow of fentanyl coming in.
You're not going to use the money
that is
to
actually
do that,
exactly what
dipwad.
President Biden has done.
You want to use it so that they
in
can
last
make
year's
sandwiches
budget,
and
fiscal
change
year
diapers.
2023, the appropriations included 300 additional U.S. Border Patrol agents, which was the first increase since 2011. Included
That's why
125 more CBP officers, $70 million
correct.
for non-intrusive inspection, and
Yes, Mimsy.
200 House Republicans,
Did you start
including
your
every
hat
single
yet?
Republican serving at the time who
This
currently
is too
sits on this
small
committee,
of a hook
voted
for me. I think
against
I have to find a
that
bigger
bill.
one.
Under the Biden administration, the Department of Homeland Security has seized more fentanyl and arrested
should
more
have bought
criminals
2 things
for
of
fentanyl-related
Bonums.
crimes in the last 2 years than in the previous 5 years combined. And even in this Congress,
I'm gonna put
when
this
we
down
had the
for a
Department of
little
Homeland
bit.
Security appropriations markup, Mr. Correa offered an amendment that would provide more money and more resources for the border to stop the fentanyl trade, and every single Republican voted it down. But that's not it. Even with the supplemental request from the White House, they requested $1.2 billion to crack down on the trafficking of dangerous and lethal illicit drugs like fentanyl, including over $300 million for the most effective non-intrusive inspection systems. And of course, 90% of fentanyl comes through the ports of entry. So having those inspection
No, it
systems would do
doesn't,
it.
you dipwad.
Again, the Republicans will not support
to do
the
some
border
fact
with additional
checking.
resources to do
Some
the
yarn
job
looking for it,
that the secretary wants to do.
Ooh.
And so we are here yet again for a political stunt.
Mims, you need to get some yarn. Okay, so when I went to the store today after I went and got the modem, I was looking for, I can't reach it, but I had bought some yarn at Michael's. It was called Mix It Up or something, and I made that hat. I'm going to send Jamie. And it's like in one yarn, it goes for a while with like one type of color / fabric, or it's hard to describe. And then it goes to like a speckled different texture. So there's like 3 textures and 3 colors, and it's super cool. And I went to go get some ivory of that, and they didn't have any in any color. But Michael's here has, what is it called? Oh, it's buy one yarn, get one half off. So basically 25% off. And then there's a 20% off digital coupon for regular price stuff. And then this one is so soft, but like I said, you know, my fingers are kind of funky. I should have known better when I looked at this hook. But this is a number 3 yarn. What is it called? It's so soft. Loops and threads, ombre hues. And this was $5.99 for this, and it's, uh-oh, the power just flickered. That's not good. What is this called? That scared me for a moment. Just watch now. As soon as my internet works, the power is going to go out in the house. Yeah, so this is a G. So when the J hook is probably the one I use the most with a number 4. But this stuff is really, really soft. It's just, I think it's too tiny for, if you don't have arthritic hands, this stuff is really soft. Like, it's going to make a super cute hat. And it's like, you know, it takes a while to get the stitches to go around. Or the color to change. But that's a pretty good deal. There was a Joanne Fabrics, but I was a little itching to come home. I had a couple errands to run on the way back, and I just got too tired, and I didn't feel like going all the way over to Joann's. So, but that, if you can find that Mix It, maybe I can look on my app and see if I can tell you which one it was. And it was on clearance when I got it last time.
To make an argument that this administration is not doing anything, even as it is negotiating to try to address the problems at the border, and even as it is trying to increase the number of border agents and technology to address the fentanyl system. Let's stop this sham impeachment hearing, and let's go negotiate with the Senate and the White House, who are doing that right now with Secretary Mayorkas to address the problems at the border. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for his 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dunn, I was watching you as we listened to my friend from New York just now and heard what you said. You did a fantastic job sort of defeating his point in the little bit of time he gave you. But as he was saying that they make the issue that Republicans aren't sending more money to the border. What every jurisdiction in the United States, notably New York, Chicago, and others are suffering is a deluge of immigrants that the country cannot assimilate, that are not prepared to be assimilated culturally, by linguistic background, by experience. They're not.
If I'm not too tired at the end of this, I would like to play about 15 minutes from Mark Levin's Life, Liberty, and Levin. I think it was either last week or the week before. He had discussed about the border, the immigration crisis, and then probably one of my favorites, he interviewed Victor Davis Hanson, who I could listen to until my ears fall off, frankly. And him and Mark were talking about the fact that the immigrants that do come into our country legally, even legally in some cases, but for sure the ones that are illegal, there's a lack of assimilation, and how we're the only country in the whole entire world who, you know, doesn't hold the immigration to an assimilation factor. Like we just bend over backwards to, you know, continue for them to continue to feel like they live from whatever country that they are. Like, they need to learn how to, if you want to live here and be a member of society, you got to, speak English, etc. I don't know if that's coming across the way I had intended. They do a much better job of it. But if I'm not too tired at the end of this hearing, I would like to play that for you. It's not very long. But it's really good. And just tack that on at the end, because he just mentioned the assimilation factor.
We can't get the job done that way. The only proposals that Democrats have offered, let's go down on record, the only proposals that have been offered is to send more money to the border, which will be used to process more immigrants faster into the country, number one, or number two, to legalize them all, grant them amnesty, as if that would somehow address any of the problems that we're experiencing. Not one of them would be addressed. So I appreciate, Ms. Nobles, you, and Ms. Dunn, you for being here. It must be particularly infuriating to hear that when you've suffered the ultimate victimhood from the violations of law that the Secretary of Homeland Security has administered. So, Professor Pearlstein, I want to go to you, though, because I want to talk about that victim, the rule of law. You said in your paper in defense of Secretary Mayorkas that to the extent the majority of reports allegations against the Secretary are related to those policies, in particular the suggestion that Secretary Mayorkas somehow exceeded the scope of his lawful authority to set priorities for the enforcement of U.S. immigration law. That claim has been rejected most recently by an overwhelming bipartisan majority of the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, are you referring to the United States versus Texas case from last June?
I am.
But there the majority opinion says, quote, "We take no position on whether the executive branch here is complying with its legal obligations. We hold only that the federal courts are not the proper forum to resolve this dispute." So when you read that language, how do you come to the conclusion that the court decided that Secretary Mayorkas is acting in accordance with his legal responsibilities?
The basis of the court's ruling on standing that you just described was, as Justice Kavanaugh's opinion for the majority said, the authority to decide how to prioritize and how aggressively to pursue legal actions against defendants belongs to the executive branch under Article 2. That was the basis of the ruling that there is no standing in this case.
Well, they also said they've taken no position whether the executive branch is complying with its legal obligations. How is that?
Trump appointed said this is authority that belongs exclusively to the executive branch.
Right. What you're referring to is the court says we're not in the business of refereeing anything where the executive has any amount of prosecutorial discretion. But they also say we're not deciding here whether the executive branch is complying with its legal obligations. Both of those propositions are true. They're both in the opinion, are they not, ma'am?
The court found that there was no standing because—
No, ma'am. I asked you a question. This proposition is in the opinion as well, correct? I read it. It's accurate.
The court found there was no standing. That is also true.
I didn't ask you about standing. I asked you whether this language that I just read, where the court said we're not determining whether the executive branch is complying with its legal obligations, that's also in the court's opinion, correct?
That may be in the court's opinion, but
that's what I asked. Thank you. Let me ask you this. At the oral argument, this was Justice Kavanaugh's question to the Solicitor General. Solicitor General of the United States. I think your position is, instead of judicial review, Congress has to resort to shutting down the government or impeachment or dramatic steps if some administration comes in and says we're not going to enforce laws, or at least not going to enforce the laws to the degree that Congress by law has said the laws should be enforced. And that's forcing, I mean, I understand your position, but it's forcing Congress to take dramatic steps. Isn't that what he said at oral argument?
I don't have the transcript of oral argument.
All right, do you disagree with his proposition as I just recited it to you?
Justice Alito said in his lone dissent that impeachment, along with funding cutoffs and others, were among the potentially available remedies that Congress has. The majority opinion, none of the other 8 justices, including all of the justices appointed by the former president, mentioned impeachment in that context. So you're aware, are you familiar with the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1996? It's a large act. Which part? The part that the United States Supreme Court considered in United States versus Texas? I've read the case. Okay. You know that, as Justice Alito describes in the dissent, that in that situation, the Congress decided to withdraw some of the discretion that the executive has by requiring detention and specifically in certain cases, right? What the court said was that for the last 27 years since that law was enacted in their current form, all 5 presidential administrations have determined the resource constraints necessitated prioritization in making immigration arrests. If you evaded a question like that before the bench, they would not like it. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for his 5 minutes questioning.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman. First, I want to thank Ms. Nobles and Mrs. Dunn for testifying and express my condolences for the loss of your children, and to tell you that I have constituents as well who have lost children to fentanyl. And I know it's not easy to come to Congress and to talk about it. And I hope that what you will find one day is a Congress that will unite and do everything it can to make sure that we reduce these deaths. I also wish we could hear from Secretary Mayorkas because he has stated he wants to come and testify, and I know Mr. Magaziner put into the record a letter from Mr. Mayorkas stating that he again would be willing to testify. He's testified 27 times to Congress, more than any other cabinet official, and twice last year before this committee, and he has made his senior officials available. And to the witnesses who have come here today, if you came looking for an audience that is serious and wants to take up this issue, I'm afraid you're in the wrong place. I'm afraid that when it comes to immigration solutions, too many of my colleagues would rather have the issue than the fix. And I am speaking for myself here, and I know I probably speak for many of my colleagues. I don't want open borders. I want a secure border. That's why I've supported surging more border agents at the border. That's why I support deploying more technologies at the border. That's why I support having more barriers at the border. And that's why I want to make sure that we also address the workforce crisis in America by increasing legal immigration and increasing immigrants who can work the jobs that Americans are just not going to work, so we can reduce the costs and give more financial breathing room to families in this country. You're not going to find that here. This is not where they do that. This is where they seek fame rather than a fix. And what you're going to find here is that if we were to solve this crisis, this committee wouldn't have anything to talk about. And that's more important to the Speaker of this House, and that's more important to the person that too many of them rely upon when they make decisions, which is the former president. I want to just give you a couple examples. Sergeant Daniels, I'm sorry he can't be here today because last time he was here, I asked him if he would support additional Border Patrol agents, as the Senate passed with 68 Republicans and Democrats not too long ago, and he said he would. And I would like to have unanimous consent to enter into the record his written testimony to our committee and to the Oversight Committee where he said that.
That objection, so ordered.
So then you have, just recently on CNN, Jake Tapper asked Speaker Johnson, look, President Biden wants to give you more money at the border. Would you take that? And Speaker Johnson said no. Again, just revealing and saying out loud what we all know, which is that they don't want to solve this problem. They want to use it and exploit it and exploit victims so they have a political narrative. Senate negotiations are taking place right now where, in good faith, Democrats and Republicans are working to try and find more solutions and more resources at the border. And that is dead on arrival here, where Republican colleagues have said out loud, we're never going to support that. That would help the president. They've actually said that. My Democratic colleagues want the fix. MAGA Republicans want the fiction. My Democratic colleagues want the fix. My MAGA colleagues want Fox. My Democratic colleagues want the fix. My MAGA colleagues want the fame. That's what this is entirely about. And if you have any questions as to whether that's what this is about, one of the questions earlier was asking a professor who came here to talk about immigration and the Constitution, whether she would condemn Hamas's attack on October 7th. Everyone here condemns Hamas's attack on October 7th. But if that same member was asked, would you condemn Donald Trump's role in the January 6th insurrection, or would you condemn the people on this committee who call the January 6th terrorists hostages, an insult to the actual hostages, American hostages, in Gaza right now, he would take a pass. He wouldn't want to answer the question. They couldn't answer the question because they won't condemn it. They don't want the fix. They want the fiction. If they were not willing to hold Donald Trump accountable for his impeachable crimes, I don't really want their hot take.
Time has expired.
I don't want their hot take
New York
on Secretary Mayorkas.
is recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
Yep, that's how it goes. Good girl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, I'm very sorry for your losses. I don't have children. I couldn't imagine what you've...
I do want to mention briefly that, again, if you have listened to these House subcommittee hearings for years and had to survive the two preceding sessions of Congress when we were in when the GOP was in the minority, they had their microphones cut off. I mean, literally the second that their time was expired, they're banging the gavel and shutting off their microphones. So whoever this lady is, they change chairmans all the time. Oops, no, I think I miscounted. That was good. Keep it up, lady.
You've gone through. But Ms. Nobles, I want to start with you. The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services have systems in place to ensure that unaccompanied alien children from non-contiguous countries are transferred from Customs and Border Protection to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR. The House Judiciary report regarding your daughter's murder notes that ORR lost track of more than 85,000 children and placed fewer than 15,000 follow-up calls after discharging an additional
85,000 children
32,000
they
children.
lost.
At no point did anyone from CBP or HHS flag this violent criminal who had a criminal gang history along with multiple MS-13 tattoos. Ms. Nobles, does this sound like a well-run system meant to protect American people?
No. Her murderer was apprehended at the border of March of 2022. They had him. They did not check. They didn't check for his background check. They let him go to an unknown sponsor. Don't even know who the sponsor is. And she takes him to Frederick, Maryland, from Texas to Maryland. And then he ended up in the same trailer as my daughter.
Okay, remember what I said in the very beginning of this? That Rachel Marin, that was murdered beginning of August 2023. She was a mother of like 5 kids. I think she was in her late 30s. The DNA evidence found on her dead body matched the DNA evidence of an SA, because we're on YouTube, in California 5 months before. I think it was in LA. The DNA matches. They have in California the Ring camera video of this guy leaving the house. He's a Hispanic male. Now, I'm not asserting the fact that he is an illegal. However, it's definitely plausible that if he was in California, Los Angeles in March, and then somehow or another is all the way over in Maryland and murders this woman out for a run, and then she just said Maryland.
As you said, as it turns out, the murderer was a known gang member, was a 16-year-old known gang member affiliated with MS-13 in El Salvador. And since the current administration's open border policy began, we've seen a sharp increase in the number of known criminals crossing our southern border.
Hispanics
that has included members of MS-13 whose motto is kill, rape, and control.
I'm just saying.
My district on Long Island has suffered from high levels of gang activity, especially MS-13 for years. It stopped actually when the former president increased, when he increased FBI and cooperation and police protection on Long Island. So we were actually winning the battle for a while.
I'm going to write that down.
But unfortunately, that's starting to change again. And
and frankly, that Rachel Marin, they had the press conference right away when they were able to match the DNA evidence. Supposedly, supposedly they interviewed somebody in Chicago that was affiliated. I'm not sure how. And they said they're getting help from the Hispanic community to try to identify the guy. And here it is, January, September, October, November, December, 5 months later, and they still don't even have a lead on this guy.
This summer, a member of MS-13 pled guilty to the murder on Long Island, pled guilty to the murder of 2 teenage girls.
Okay, so the easy way to tell if it's MS-13 is because they use machetes and sharp knives and do it very painfully. I'm not sure if we've ever figured out how Rachel Marin died. If she died by, like knife wound.
Machetes. This is just one of the many examples.
Or something. I should
Do you
look
think
that up. Where's my pen?
Border security and proper alien vetting is a national security issue?
Yes. And supposedly he's 16. We don't know his real age.
Exactly.
But they're treating him as a juvenile. But
so the guy that killed her daughter was 16.
One of the times I went to the border, because I've been several times, CBP was saying that when they were processing people who were trying to show that they're under 18, they actually found real documentation showing they were between the ages of 25 and 30. So we don't know exactly how old it is, like you said.
No.
I have heard that too.
This committee has been focused on Biden administration's refusal to secure our southwest border and vet alien arrivals. A report from the House Judiciary Committee, like I mentioned before, pointed out multiple vetting failures with your daughter's killer. Its report shows that your daughter's murderer was arrested for association with MS-13 well before he came to the United States, something that the U.S. officials verified easily after the murder. Unfortunately, it was after. Like you said, the report also noted that the alien was released after he was arrested for murder. Do you think Secretary Mayorkas has done an adequate job vetting illegal aliens coming across our border?
No, because if he was vetted, he would have never been allowed in. He would have never been allowed to come here and commit that horrific crime on my daughter.
Was it a disabled person
Thank you for your answers, and again, I'm very sorry.
There's a case going on in Boston here.
I'm not yelling at you.
No, it's okay. I'm from New York. Sometimes our tone gets. I'm not yelling. This is just how I talk.
Well, no, I was telling you that I wasn't yelling at you.
No,
I was just
So he
Ms. Dunn,
essayed a
quickly,
disabled
the United States is in a
person?
fentanyl crisis.
There should
we
be
all know
double
that. And it's being
penalties
inflamed
for
by the
that,
open
or triple
southwest border.
penalties.
Illicit narcotics have resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths in
Taking
just the past
advantage
few
of
years.
someone who's disabled.
Fentanyl is highly addictive, incredibly
That's
potent, and easy to make,
disgusting.
which is why it's a favorite drug for the cartels and drug traffickers. I'm sure you've answered this already today multiple times, but I think it's worth getting it on the record multiple times. Do you believe that Secretary Mayorkas' open borders have exacerbated the fentanyl epidemic?
Yes, I believe so.
Do you believe that Secretary Mayorkas is doing enough to fight the scourge of fentanyl?
Not at all, no.
Why not?
He needs to lock down that border. Everyone keeps saying, give them more money. Those poor Border Patrol agents are now the welcoming committee. They are ordered to be the welcoming committee. They don't want to be the welcoming committee. They're told to do that by Mayorkas, by this administration. Just like the young lady next to you had said, it's either Mayorkas or the Biden administration. Somebody is telling the poor Border Patrol to not do their job. No matter how much money you give them, they're still not going to be allowed to do their job.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
I also wanted to say, this woman, Miss Dunn, I'm going to keep an eye on her. My guess is after the subcommittee hearing, you know, hopefully people like Mark Levin maybe, or Tucker Carlson, or, you know, one of those bigger name people, will shine some more light on her daughter's death of fentanyl. We're not happy he was let out to do it again twice. Illegal alien. Like I said, I mean, these two women, one is MS-13 gang member, killed her daughter. The other one was one of the very many horror stories about fentanyl-laced drugs. And I mean, these are two women out of how many parents? That's why I like to watch these, because you get to see real stories that the news media never sheds light on.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses. Want to just get back to where we're here. This is, of course, another effort, and this hearing is really about demonizing migrants and, again, smearing Secretary Mayorkas.
Lindsay, do you have
Professor
that
Pearlstein,
guy's
thank you for being
name?
here. Are there any grounds, again, for impeaching Secretary
write it down.
Mayorkas under the Constitution?
I don't believe the Constitution supports impeachment in this case.
Thank you. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the most important question, and really gets to the heart of why we're here today. We talked a lot about the fentanyl crisis and fentanyl in this committee and today, but the fentanyl crisis we know is a tragedy. But we also, it's important to remember who didn't end the fentanyl crisis. That was actually Donald Trump. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to introduce this article titled Synthetic Opioid Overdose Deaths Soared While Trump Was President. I also would like to, into the record, put this other article, Opioid Crisis, Critics Say Trump Fumbled Response to Another Deadly Epidemic. And I bring these documents up because I think it's really important to note that during Trump's presidency, the fentanyl crisis had already been a huge challenge across this country. In fact, Trump said before the 2016 election, he said the opioid crisis was destroying.
Don't get me started with this guy here. You know what else has exacerbated the fentanyl crisis? The fact that pharmaceuticals to help people with actual legitimate pain no longer can get their legitimate pain medication. They're turning to the streets for pain relief. There is no such thing as, for some people, ibuprofen doesn't work. Tylenol doesn't work. For some people, or too much ibuprofen, too much Tylenol will damage your liver. It'll damage, I think, your kidneys. One is liver and one is kidneys, I think. And so, the opioid crisis, was exacerbated by the fact that certain states, Florida is one, had those gigantic pill mills where people would go and get their Percocet or Vicodin or whatever for non-legitimate reasons, and they'd get overabundance of them, where it's normal people who had prescription pain medication, who went and got it from their normal regular doctor, not a pill mill. Those people were just cut off from pain relief, and instead sent, into you know, spine places that don't want to give you pain pills. They want to cauterize your nerves, or they want to give you trigger point injections all over your freaking body. And, you know, what's your only other option for pain relief? Well, suffer, number one. Or number two, some people will go to the streets. So, you know, and that started in, what was it? Obama's last couple years is when they really started cracking down about those Florida pill mill clinics. Chronic sufferers have to suffer because of these junkies. And that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I mean, everybody's body's different. Some people can take an ibuprofen or an naproxen or a Tylenol or aspirin or whatever. And other people, you know, that doesn't quite cut it. I don't know. That's a whole different subject.
Lives and shattering families. And he said, quote, "We are going to stop the inflow of drugs into New Hampshire and into our country 100%. 100%. Trump promised. In 2017, Trump's first year in office, more than 42,000 Americans died from overdoses linked to heroin, fentanyl, and prescription opioids. There was a huge fentanyl problem when Donald Trump was president. The administration didn't even bother to issue a national strategy on fentanyl in his first 2 years in office. So I think it's crazy that the majority is trying to turn this into a public health crisis that somehow knew or began during the Biden administration. Unfortunately, this is about much larger issues that we have, because our conversation today isn't about the Constitution or the law. It's not even about securing the border. The majority is not interested in solutions. Donald Trump, as always, said the quiet part out loud when he said immigrants, and I quote, "are poisoning the blood of our country." As we know, this is rhetoric that can be compared to Hitler and the kind of rhetoric that he used. Extremists here in Congress also continue to push issues like the Great Replacement theory. And we should be clear, immigrants are some of the most patriotic and hardworking people there are in this country. I just heard a committee member say, and I quote, they are not prepared to be assimilated, talking about immigrants. I'm an immigrant. I think I'm pretty well assimilated here. I am a member of Congress. And so I think it's very un-American to attack and demonize migrants the way that some in this majority continue to do. Immigrants aren't here to poison or victimize the American people. I also want to just touch on this issue of crime. Some in the majority continue to talk about crime, and crime is a horrific tragedy. Clearly, I feel horrible for our witnesses that are here that have lost members of their family. But let's look at real data as well. Both undocumented and documented immigrants are much less likely to commit crimes or be incarcerated than native-born American citizens. Our border communities are often safer from violent crimes than many interior cities. And according to FBI crime data, crime in border communities was measured to actually be 15% lower than the national average. So from a crime perspective, more crime is being committed by American citizens than those folks that are undocumented or they're immigrants. Democrats also want an orderly and secure border. We want real solutions to the fentanyl crisis. But we need to understand the problems we're trying to solve need solutions, legislation, not impeachments of the secretary, and certainly not impeachments of President Biden. The idea that any of these problems will be solved by the border alone, I think, is also crazy. These problems have existed for decades. We haven't had immigration reform or any sort of policy in over 30 years. And without legal pathways, we will never have an orderly border. That is also a fact. And we can't have a conversation with a presidential candidate, a former president, who thinks immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation, who thinks that we should build a moat with alligators along the border, who thinks that we should put spikes on the wall that he's trying to build, who has said that we should shoot migrants in the legs as they're crossing the border, who thinks we should send missiles into northern Mexico. These are the ideas being offered.
I'm going to turn him down. We should put spikes on the top of them. So if, like, what was his name? Benjamin Gray that was here earlier. If they decided to figure out how to build a 30-foot or 30-foot tall friggin' ladder to go over the top, they'd have the friggin' spikes on. How is that a bad thing?
Statistics about the catastrophe at our southern border, the millions of migrants coming across our border illegally, the human trafficking, the fentanyl, the lost unaccompanied minors. But today we hear something that is even more important than that. Today we hear the real personal stories of unfathomable loss and irreplaceable lives. And yet, even in the face of this testimony that we have heard today and the testimony that came before it, our colleagues across the aisle impugn the purpose and the necessity of this hearing, calling it a political sham, calling it a stunt, calling it theater. And they suggest that what we actually need to do is pass more laws. So as a former federal prosecutor and judge, I'll start today with a refresher on a few of the things that are currently illegal in the United States of America. It is illegal to traffic fentanyl in the United States of America. Human trafficking is illegal in this country. Theft is illegal in this country. Rape and murder are illegal in this country. What's more, the Department of Homeland Security has an absolute obligation to detain and remove those who enter this country illegally. We do not need more laws. We need a President of the United States and a Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security who enforce the laws of this country. But what do we have instead? An administration that has deliberately subverted the duly enacted laws of the United States of America, that have deliberately defied the orders of courts in this United States of America, who have ordered and directed that they desist these unlawful policies. We have a Department of Homeland Security that has defied inquiries from the United States Congress. And as for the 27 appearances of Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in front of this Congress, not one of those times did he admit that we have lost operational control of our border, that we have ceded control of our border to the Mexican drug cartels, or acknowledge the scope, scale, and crisis that our communities all across America face as a consequence, as a direct consequence of these lawless policies. Every single time an individual is allowed to enter this country unlawfully, Americans are less safe. Ms. Nobles, Mrs. Dunn, as a mother, I see my child and my family in those photos that you shared with us today. And it is truly something that we cannot fathom, the loss that you have each suffered. I thank you for your willingness to come here today and share with us your stories. I would like to hear your perspective, please, on what more Congress could be doing to support you and to try to prevent this type of unspeakable tragedy from happening in the lives of another family. We'll start with you, Ms. Nobles.
I would like to see every illegal immigrant who wants to come here to be properly vetted and background checked. I hear a lot about more funding, resources, and all that. How is that going to help them do their job in the first place? They failed Kayla by not checking her murderer's background and did not make that one phone call. One phone call could have saved my baby's life. They didn't. And after he was arrested, they put him, Child Protective Services took him and put him in an unsecured children's home with other children. And I know Americans commit crimes on other Americans, but why do we have to take other countries' trash? Why do we need them?
Ms. Dunn?
We talked about a lot today about more resources at the border. And I appreciate that and I respect that. But I don't think that members in this room and other rooms at the Capitol understand that we are actually at war. And we're at war with the cartels. We're losing our children. We're losing a generation of children. We're at war. We need our military at the border. That's what we need. We don't need more Border Patrol. We need our military at the border, stopping the drugs, stopping people from coming in. They can't come in. We're full. We're closed. That's it. No more money. No more. No more sandwiches. It's closed. I'm sorry. Come through the proper channels. I am a first-generation American. My parents both migrated here. Guess what? They did it legally.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. My time has expired. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing here today. I appreciate you sharing your stories, and I'm sorry for your immeasurable grief. And the folks on this committee look forward to working together in a way where we can solve some of the challenges that are facing our country. But since this is an impeachment hearing, I will direct my question to Professor Pearlstein. As the professor has observed, there are provisions of the Constitution that are murky and subject to debate, and provisions that are clear. Article 2, Section 4 is clear. Treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors are the only constitutionally permissible grounds for impeachment. My Republican colleagues have not come close to making a constitutionally sound case for impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas. They have incorrectly argued that the Secretary's designations of certain groups as eligible for parole constitutes, quote, mass parole, and is inconsistent with law. Each case is considered on a discretionary case-by-case basis, which is a requirement in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It is worth noting that parole authority has been used by every administration since President Eisenhower, who paroled 30,000 Hungarian nationals fleeing communism. Professor Pearlstein, does the Secretary's exercise of well-established parole authority constitute treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors?
I don't believe it does, no.
Thank you. My Republican colleagues have also argued that Secretary Mayorkas is violating the law by releasing migrants awaiting adjudication of their asylum claims. That claim is not true, and that practice is not new. In fact, DHS released hundreds of thousands of individuals at the U.S.-Mexico border under President Trump. Professor Pearlstein, does detaining migrants in a manner consistent with the law and the resources provided by this Congress constitute treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors?
No, it doesn't.
Finally, my Republican colleagues have also incorrectly criticized the Secretary's guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration law, which prioritize enforcement actions based on national security, public safety, and border security. But as Justice Kavanaugh observed in United States v. Texas, Article 2 of the Constitution confers upon the executive branch the, quote, authority to decide how to prioritize and how aggressively to pursue legal actions against defendants who violate the law, and that principle extends to the immigration context. Professor Pearlstein, does exercising well-established authority to prioritize immigration enforcement actions constitute treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors?
No, sir.
Thank you. This committee has engaged in months of so-called investigations into the administration's border security policies. Despite all of the time and resources committee Republicans have invested, they still cannot make a case for impeaching the secretary that meets constitutional muster. Instead of wasting more time on a baseless impeachment, we should get back to the work of passing bills that will actually help solve problems. But Republicans don't seem interested in that. They made their immigration proposal, H.R. 2, as cruel and unworkable as possible, rejecting every amendment Democrats on this committee offered in good faith, amendments some Republicans agreed would improve the bill. Everyone on this committee wants to fight the scourge of fentanyl in this country. That's why, during our markup of H.R. 2, I offered an amendment to authorize the Biden administration's Operation Blue Lotus, an aggressive strategy for fighting drug trafficking with a proven record of stopping fentanyl from being smuggled into the country. But every one of my Republican colleagues voted against it. Why? Because while they talk the talk, they refuse to walk the walk. H.R. 2, you talk about it in every response. What's your alternative to H.R. 2? Why does it have to be H.R. 2 or nothing? If you're serious about figuring out the border, work with us. Let's come up with another solution. But you go back to H.R. 2 every time you're challenged about the substance of what we're doing here while you are in the majority on the border. Come up with a second proposal or a third proposal that can pass this House, be signed into law, and we can get to work. You sit on H.R. 2. You point to H.R. 2 and say, that's the work we've done. Meanwhile, you bring these witnesses here to talk about the tragedies they've experienced, but what are we doing now? What's your proposal now besides H.R. 2? There's nothing. There's nothing. This is about scoring political points. You want to make this administration look weak on the border? When are we going to put our country above party again? I believe in you guys. I believe you want to do that. Let's do it. But talking about H.R. 2 as a solution is a farce. And one day I do hope that we can work together on these issues. I would love to do that because the work of this country is critical and we need to get to it. With that, I yield back.
Now recognize the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes of questioning.
I appreciate my colleague from New Jersey's comments. I do believe he's operating in good faith, but I just think he's wrong. And while there's squabbles between members of both parties in this committee, the executive branch has every power in its toolbox to get this done right away. It can reinstate Remain in Mexico, can stop the repositioning of border agents away from the border and towards migrant processing centers. It could do things on its own through executive action to clean up this mess. H.R. 2 is our response to that. That would require the administration to do those things to protect Americans. Madam Chairwoman, we've spent 13 months in this committee laying out the case that our border is not secure. And Americans are with us on this. 67% of Americans think the president is failing in his duty to secure the border. Much of our case in the last 13 months has been backed up by data, some pretty big numbers. Millions of migrants unlawfully mass paroled into the United States, hundreds of thousands of gotaways, and tens of thousands of fentanyl deaths. But today it's not about the data. Before us today are two actual victims of Secretary Mayorkas' open border. A mother whose daughter was sexually assaulted and murdered by an MS-13 member, and another member whose daughter was fatally poisoned by fentanyl. Ms. Dunn and Ms. Nobles, as a father of 3 young girls for whom I would do and give anything, I can literally not imagine what you're going through. I appreciate you being here today, ripping off some of the scabs of the wound that has been caused and telling us your story so that we could be more informed and help solve this problem. Appreciate you being here today. Madam Chairman, if we had a more secure border, these horrific tragedies could have been avoided. If Secretary Mayorkas stopped paroling mass groups of migrants into the United States, these tragedies could have been avoided. If Secretary Mayorkas stopped repositioning border agents away from the border just to sit behind a desk to process more and more unvetted migrants into the United States, we would have less grieving mothers. Madam Chairman, the Biden administration has often falsely claimed that 90% of all fentanyl comes through ports of entry. I actually have a video of Secretary Mayorkas claiming that, and if we could play that, please.
And people should understand, it is not in between the ports of entry that the majority of fentanyl is sought to be smuggled. It's not through the migrants that we encounter in between the ports of entry. It's through passenger vehicles, through commercial trucks at our ports of entry where the substance is concealed in compartments.
Congressman, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection data
evidences that more than 90% of the fentanyl that enters this country is coming through the ports of entry.
The Secretary's wrong, and he's smart enough to know that he's wrong. 90% only accounts for what is seized and not what actually makes it across the borders. Only the cartels probably, who are profiting millions, tens of millions a month, know how much fentanyl is actually making it across the borders. In fact, Border Patrol officials have told this committee they believe that only 5 to 10% of fentanyl is actually seized. The fact that there are more than 70,000 deaths in our country in 2022 from fentanyl should be a telltale sign that fentanyl is flooding into this country, not only through ports of entry, but in between ports of entry as well. Ms. Dunn, do you think that pulling Border Patrol agents away from the border just to have them sit behind a desk to mass process more and more migrants into the country is a wise decision?
No.
Do you think that that decision leads to more opportunities for the cartels to traffic fentanyl into this country?
Yes.
Thank you. And what impact, and I know you have the most personal of experience, but what impact do you think that fentanyl has had on the public health of the United States?
Well, the most obvious one that I can see is I have a grandson that doesn't have a mother. He has other family that is able to raise him, but we haven't even begun to talk about the foster care system and how many children have lost their parents. Little babies under 18 that are now wards of the states. Where's all that money coming from? And let's think about the traumas and sadness and what it's like to not have parents because their parents died from fentanyl.
Ms. Dunn, the Secretary knows your story, and he knows of other stories like yours, and he hasn't changed his policies. He hasn't insisted those border agents stay on the border. He hasn't canceled the mass parole of migrants in the United States. What could you say with respect to the Secretary's likely approach and his care for situations like yours, given that he hasn't changed his policies?
It's very difficult for me to contain what I would say. How about that?
I appreciate that.
I'd rather not say what I would like to say.
You're a classy person, and I appreciate you being here before us today. I yield.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Clark from New York for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our ranking member. Good afternoon, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing here today. And to our bereaved mothers, you have my deepest condolences. Earlier today, my colleagues discussed Republican opposition to providing CBP much-needed resources in the FY 2023 funding bill. But that isn't the only time Republicans have opposed resources to secure our border. In October, President Biden sent Congress a supplemental funding request for FY 2024, which included an additional $13.6 billion for border security. It would provide an additional 1,300 Border Patrol agents to work alongside the 20,200 agents already funded by the requested FY 2024 budget, 375 immigration judges, teams to strengthen the immigration court system, 1,600 asylum officers to speed up processing of asylum claims, 1,000 CBP officers with a focus on countering fentanyl, new detection technology for ports of entry, more immigration detention beds, additional investigative capabilities to combat fentanyl trafficking, and $600 million more in grants to help communities receiving migrants, among other investments. As Secretary Mayorkas and bipartisan members of the Senate are in negotiations to get these much-needed resources enacted, House Republicans are just absent. Instead, they are focused on impeaching Secretary Mayorkas. Professor Pearlstein, do impeachment resolutions change policy?
No, ma'am.
Do they provide resources or authorize funding?
No, ma'am.
Even if House Republicans attempted to impeach Secretary Mayorkas is successful, the Senate would have to convict. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's true.
And how many senators are required to convict the secretary?
Conviction requires 2/3 of the Senate.
After a conviction, what happens next?
The person would be removed from office, and the president has the opportunity to appoint someone new.
The secretary would be removed, and for a period of time pending confirmation of a new secretary, another official would serve as acting secretary. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would that individual be obligated to execute the administration's policies?
Yes, he serves at the pleasure of the president.
So functionally, nothing would change.
That's correct.
If instead House Republicans decided to negotiate and pass the president's supplemental appropriations, what effect would that have on resources and policy?
Congress could pass laws today that have enormous effect, not just on the availability of resources, but how those resources are allocated. So if Congress is unhappy with, for example, where officers are placed, Congress can impose conditions on existing funds that require the president to do something different. If they believe that the president or the secretary is not complying with those laws, they can challenge them in court, and that's exactly the process that's been playing out in recent years.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, Republicans have a choice. They can continue to pursue this sham impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, which will change nothing, and in fact could slow down efforts to address challenges at the southwest border, or they can work with the White House and bipartisan members of the Senate on legislation to improve border security and reduce drug trafficking. I urge my colleagues to get back to work for the American people. And with that, I thank you and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Strong for his 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hi, Scott.
Ms. Nobles, my heart goes out to you for the loss of your daughter. Thank you for being here with us today and for sharing her story. As you've been told, this committee today, the man that took Kayla's life was in this country illegally. He was originally from El Salvador, where he was a known member of the MS-13 gang, a fact which was later easily verified, both by his gang tattoos and by a simple call to the El Salvador government. Ms. Nobles, does it concern you that Secretary Mayorkas has not made any significant changes to his border policies, especially ones that make it easier for illegal aliens to enter and continually be released into our country without proper vetting?
Yes, very concerning, because I don't want this to happen to someone else's daughter or child.
Thank you. In August of 2023, there was an individual arrested in Alabama whose background is stunningly similar to Kayla's murder. He was an El Salvador illegal here in the U.S. He was also a member of the MS-13 and on El Salvador's top 100 most wanted list. He earned a spot on this list for aggravated kidnapping, attempted aggravated homicide, aggravated extortion, and terrorist organization. He was previously deported, yet Mayorkas opened the border and was able to make it back into this country. You start looking at this, Ms. Noble, this illustrates what we both know to be true. These are unfortunately not isolated events. As a matter of fact, from fiscal year 2021 to date, Border Patrol has recorded 41,162 arrests of illegal aliens with criminal backgrounds, approximately 88% higher than the combined previous fiscal years, the 4 years combined. Ms. Nobles, shouldn't just one instance that an illegal alien has endangered or taken the life of an innocent American like your daughter be a wake-up call to Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden?
Yes, most definitely.
As a member just said, there are no experts to raise their hands and say Mayorkas should be impeached. Ms. Nobles and Ms. Dunn, let me get one thing straight. You're experts. You lost it all. As a matter of fact, it has been more than just one instance. In Alabama alone, May 2023, an illegal alien from Honduras raped a teenage girl in a restaurant bathroom. November 2022, an illegal alien sodomized a 13-year-old boy. July 2022, an illegal immigrant from Mexico killed and dismembered a woman's body and her child. The lone survivor, a 12-year-old girl, escaped after watching this horrific scene and being held captive with the decomposing remains. How many more stories like this will it take for Secretary Mayorkas and the Biden administration to wake up? The Stay in Mexico Act, it worked. The Stay in Mexico Act, it worked. I don't care which president was there, whether it was Obama, whether it was Trump, the Stay in Mexico Act worked. Process them, fuel up ICE air, send them back to the country of their origin. If not this, then what will compel them to act? I agree, Secretary Mayorkas is not the solution. He is part of the problem. He created this circus. He has failed to carry out U.S. law. 8.5 million illegals have crossed the southern border from 160 countries. They come into our country, they're invading our country from 160 countries. Fentanyl crossing the border by planes, mules, drones. Child slavery is rampant, and both sides of the aisle know it. 85,000 children illegally brought into America, and this administration says we have no clue where they are. No clue where they are. Guess what? They're in sex slavery in our country. Let me answer the fact. But I'm telling you right now, both of you are experts. You lost it all. You lost your daughters. You're an expert. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen, for his 5 minutes of testimony or questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given a markup that's going on in budget, appreciate your indulgences with me slipping in. You know, just as my colleague just talked about, just a great loss. Thank you both very much for your courage, given what you've been through. We know that the decisions by Mayorkas, in addition to just this administration's decisions, have caused chaos on our southern border. Just their reluctance to simply enforce congressional law, whether it's parole, detention, deportation. These are all things that Congress set up as a barrier to protect us against the heinous acts that the mothers in this room your families have been the victims of. I want to ask you, Ms. Nobles, in your testimony, you said that the El Salvadorian government had a documented criminal history of your daughter's murderer. Now we're talking about an illegal alien who sexually assaulted and murdered your daughter. And they were aware of this involvement and that there was an MS-13 gang membership also associated with this individual. How long after your daughter's death were you made aware of this?
At first, we did not know that it was MS-13 until after the DNA evidence came back, linked him, and then once he was arrested, then we were told it was an MS-13 gang member, and he has like 11 charges against him right now.
And what was the federal agency that provided the information to you?
It was no federal. It took the local detectives to find out that he was MS-13.
And when you were told this, were you given an explanation why DHS, Department of Homeland Security, never checked his body? Tattoos that would bring about, suspicion or contact the government to ask if he had affiliations or a prior criminal history. Have you had a chance to ask the DHS about that failure?
No, DHS and DHHS has failed to make a comment or say anything to me about Kayla or anything.
Let me ask you, do you think, Ms. Nobles, that the Secretary is doing everything he can to secure that southern border?
No.
Yeah. I know it comes across as a question that anyone who's lost what you've lost, you have the utmost right to be heard by the American people. It's one thing to abstract, talk about this. It's another thing to be victimized by someone's refusal to enforce what the law of the land is, what congressional law is. If you were able to speak to Secretary Mayorkas, which, my inclination is he probably is paying attention, even though he's refusing to come and be a part with the invitation that our chairman sent him. What would you say to Secretary Mayorkas, and what questions would you ask him? And I'll give you all the time you want. I'm going to end my conclusions there. When you get done, Ms. Nobles, if there's time, Ms. Dunn on the clock up here, I'd love to hear your comments as well. What would you tell the Secretary?
I would ask him, how did you allow a known gang member to be allowed in this country? How can anyone be okay with a known gang member to come into this country and to end up in Maryland? And I also wanted to know what else DHS and DHHS is hiding. I was told that her murderer's file is so thick that Jim Jordan only had 2 hours to even look at the file. What else are they hiding about this murderer? I want to know. I mean, I want to know what they're hiding about this murderer. That's why he is being protected, why everything about him is being protected. We haven't even got to trial yet. Her trial is set for June 28th of this year, and they have 4 or 5 thick binders full of a bunch of evidence that we haven't even know yet. We don't even know over half of the stuff that was done to her in that room.
And I'm going to ask you, as a follow-up, I've got 30 seconds left. There's a statement that talks about, I actually quoted this to Mayorkas when he was before this committee. It actually comes out of the Old Testament or the Torah, where it talks about blood on your hands. If you see destruction coming, talking about a watchman, and you don't cry out, do you think the Secretary, based upon him knowing what is happening, letting people come into this country, do you think he has blood on his hands?
Yes, he is responsible for my daughter's death.
Ms. Dunn?
I know that Secretary Mayorkas has 2 daughters, and they're grown adults. And I just don't know how he would feel if it was one of his daughters that he lost to either one of these situations. We talked a little bit today about resources, okay? I have a resource in my purse. It's Narcan. It costs $45 in a pharmacy in Arizona. It's not free. You want to spend some money? You want to spend some of my tax dollars? Give this away for free. Everywhere, anywhere, everywhere. That's what you need to spend your money on. I don't want to spend any more money on illegals. I want to save lives.
Thank
you. Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell, for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you all for coming today.
everyone in here said it. I spoke to my Democratic colleagues and my Republican colleagues, and our hearts are with you. And I hope that doesn't seem meaningless coming from where we're sitting today. Unfortunately, you've got to experience what Congress is all like right here in real life. And normally when you're watching C-SPAN, you can usually turn it off. But this is how we interact with each other, unfortunately. But thank you, and I'm very, very sorry for your loss. I was a military man in my former life, and when forward deployed overseas, tasked with securing any given area, we followed that under the Constitution as military men, because we raised our right hand and swore to defend the Constitution of the United States. And sometimes our jobs were to prevent movement through any given space. Our job was to protect our men and women that were tasked underneath us, wholeheartedly, unconditionally. And in war, you lose, men and women, you do. It's just part of the conflict. There's nothing that can be said to anybody when that happens, but it's absolute warfare. But as a military man, as an officer, if any given space that I was defending, if it was rushed by individuals and overtaken, I would be relieved of command. Plain and simple, my leadership would look down at me as like, you failed, we're gonna relieve you of your duty. If I lost lives, and most likely, if it was negligent, I would be relieved of duty. Depending on the surge of numbers and however that played out, there could possibly have been a court-martial. And I lived by that, we all do. So when I see these numbers, and this is where I sit, why I'm going after the impeachment, is when I look to the leader that's supposed to be defending our country, and just numbers, I don't care if Democrat, Republican, just sheer numbers, yearly, since the secretary has been in position, the numbers have grown exponentially. They have. Numbers of which, if that had happened to us overseas, it had been catastrophic. Because if my leadership didn't take control and act accordingly, the Navy would have. And then it would have grown and grown and grown until we were held accountable. Each year, since Secretary has been in place, those numbers for fentanyl deaths, sex trade, gang members, not to mention the amount of addiction. We talk about deaths, but the addiction rate is astronomical. If those numbers were dipping down, that's one thing, but they're progressively getting worse and worse. They're out of control. Professor, I have a question for you. I know that you don't support the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas constitutionally. Do you support the removal, given the sheer numbers that we're seeing? Do you support the removal, or would you support the removal, period, of Secretary Mayorkas because of his failures to lead the Department of Homeland Security?
I'm simply not an expert on immigration policy.
No, it's a personal question.
I really don't have a position on the removal of Secretary Mayorkas.
Well,
As a matter of law, I don't think the basis
No, this is a personal. I know you say constitutionally that is not the case. You don't support that. And I understand that completely. I understand your perspective, and I appreciate it. But the United States is one of the leading countries in sex trafficking. Houston, Texas is the worst city in the country, which is in my district. I represent over 700,000 men and women in District 8 in the great state of Texas. And they are demanding the removal of Secretary Mayorkas, demanding it. And I'm the voice in Washington, D.C. to say, hey, I'm speaking for my people, and this is what they are demanding. So since the administration, President Biden will not remove Mr. Mayorkas constitutionally or however he sees it, and I understand your perspective, what I want to hear is, do you think Mr. Mayorkas needs to be removed because of his failure, in my opinion, in his role?
What I think you should tell your constituents in response to their demands is that they should vote for a different president.
Well, that's amen to that. I'm sure they're on board with that exact statement. But I do every day have to sit in front of the mothers and fathers of them that have lost their babies. And they're never going to get their babies back. And I can tell them to vote all day long, but 4 years is an extremely long time to have somebody failing us in protecting our borders. So the Republican Party is having to act and act accordingly. And that's why this impeachment process is happening. I understand. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dunn, Ms. Nobles, thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you for your courage. Ms. Dunn happens to be a constituent of mine. She once confronted me at a town hall in Yavapai County and begged me to do something about this invasion at our southern border. Honestly, I couldn't blame her one bit. As a father, I would have done the exact same thing that you did, ma'am. Ms. Dunn, after listening to my Democratic colleagues today, I think you probably had a decent idea of what the problem was before you came up here, but I think it's a lot more in focus now, is it not? I'm glad you had a chance to confront the problem today. We will continue to confront the problem, but I'm glad you got a chance to see it for yourself. Ms. Pearlstein, you said during the audio recording that the chairman played
One of the criteria for impeachment is serious offenses against public trust. Do you still stand by this comment today, ma'am?
As I've explained before, offenses against the public trust are instances in which an official is willfully acting for his own benefit or the benefit of his own power or on behalf of a foreign power.
Thank you. How is this border crisis that has been planned and executed by Secretary Mayorkas not a serious offense to public trust, Ms. Pearlstein?
Having read through the materials, I see no evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has acted on behalf of his own benefit, financially or politically, and I see no evidence that there is collusion or other cooperation or acting on behalf of foreign power.
Do you see evidence of betrayal of public trust? If you need help finding that, ma'am, look to your right. There's 2 mothers in here that have had their complete lives destroyed, their families destroyed. I'm going to ask Ms. Dunn, has your public trust in Secretary Mayorkas and the Department of Homeland Security been broken?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Nobles?
Yes.
Do you guys feel betrayed by Secretary Mayorkas and the Department of Homeland Security? You guys know his job is Secretary of Homeland Security. His job, in his title, is to protect the homeland, Homeland Security. Do you guys feel betrayed?
Yes.
I thought so. Ms. Pearlstein, are you familiar with Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, often known as the Invasion Clause?
Yes, I've read the Constitution.
That's not what I asked, ma'am. I asked if you're familiar with that article.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to read it. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and here's the point, and shall protect each of them against invasion. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, do you think that this Homeland Security Secretary is protecting these states against invasion? Is protecting Arizona?
Arizona is not protected against invasion.
Ms. Pearlstein, after having me read that, do you think that this secretary is protecting the 50 states against invasion?
The word invasion in that clause is not in reference to migrants who are not trying to overthrow the government of the United States.
Oh, it's interesting that you say that, ma'am. Very interesting that you say that. Ma'am, Ms. Pearlstein, have you ever studied unconventional warfare? Any idea what that term means?
I've heard that term used. I'm not an expert in unconventional warfare.
Do you have any idea what it might mean? Go ahead, take a stab at it.
I would rather hear your definition.
Okay, great. Do you think in any wild and unprecedented strategy in the history of the world, one of our adversaries might try and send their soldiers to infiltrate our country using our wide open border, not putting them in uniforms, and having them come and present themselves in front of our Border Patrol agents and tell our Border Patrol agents, oh, we're just innocent immigrants. We just want a better life. Do you think that's even possible, Ms. Pearlstein?
Might anyone ever lie at the border? Yes.
Okay. So it is possible that tens of thousands, you know that's how many we're getting a day, right, ma'am? About 10,000 a day? 10 to 15,000 a day? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of any statistics.
Okay, well, I'll fill you in then, ma'am. You're in the Homeland Security Committee. It's about 10 to 15,000 often, sometimes 12,000 a day. That's more than a combat division coming through our southern border from 160 countries, some of which are adversarial. And I'm going to tell you right now, unconventional warfare has been used since the beginning of time. These people aren't stupid. They're using access to our country to bring in individuals who want to do harm to it. I've been in the classified briefs. It's a fact, ma'am. How many families have to be ruined? How many mothers have to sit next to you before you come to understand this is an invasion of our country and he's in complete dereliction of duty of his constitutional oath to protect and defend the United States of America? How many, ma'am? Would we need to have 100 here today for you?
Impeachment will not address the policy problem you describe.
That's not a policy problem. That is him completely derelicting his oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I read you the invasion clause. He is not doing that, ma'am. He's in complete dereliction of doing it in accordance with the other laws that other committee members have read to you today. And I think it's sad. This shouldn't be a partisan issue at all, and you know it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Titus, the gentlelady from Nevada, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, offer my deepest sympathy to the witnesses for their loss. Professor, you're the only expert in here on this topic. Would you say one more time for the record if the Constitution covers what Mr. Crane called dereliction of his oath or any of the things that are being addressed here in terms of grounds for impeachment?
I don't believe the record supports grounds for impeachment here, no.
And are you in the mainstream of other constitutional scholars who have taken this position, written letters to the Post, written letters to our chairman, been public about this impeachment?
I signed a letter that was, in addition to another dozen or more bipartisan set of constitutional law scholars who took the same position.
and I want to emphasize that was a bipartisan list of scholars who are very versed in this topic and who know it better than any of us sitting up here. So it was interesting to me that when I heard Ms. Green and her tirade against you saying, we're not talking about the Constitution. She actually had the gall to say, we're not talking about the Constitution. And she's the one who entered the resolution that we are considering. So if we're not talking about the Constitution, what are we talking about? Well, we're wasting our breath talking about history, talking about precedent, talking about previous cases, talking about the language of the Constitution, talking about the original intent of the Constitution, because obviously the people on that side of the room are not talking about the Constitution. So they are throwing out 200 years of precedent. They're ignoring the interpretation of all these constitutional scholars. They're disregarding some of the comments that have been made by members of their own party about the folly of this resolution and this pursuit. So if we're not talking about the Constitution, then what are we talking about? It's a political stunt. It's an attempt to distract from a do-nothing Congress that's done nothing, and even less compared to the do-nothing Congress so named by Truman. And, you know, I see another quote that I think is relevant. It was by the Assistant Secretary of Labor, Mr. Post, who they brought up to impeach in 1920. And by the way, it's only been done one time over 100 years ago, but they tried it in 1920. And his response was, it was mental dullness at high tension. I believe we've seen a lot of evidence today of mental dullness at high tension, with raised voices, with misinformation, with accusations, with demeaning comments. That was mental dullness at high tension. So if we're not talking about the Constitution, we're just trying to use some constitutional terms to pretend like stump the professor, we know more than they do. I would say that my colleagues across the aisle are simply just trying to put lipstick on a pig. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize the ranking member for his closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I compliment the gentlelady from Nevada, even though you sound like you're from Mississippi with your accent. Let me just say that we've had about 4.5, 5 hours of hearing today on this so-called impeachment. It's unfortunate because we've not heard any solutions being offered in the course of this hearing. And because of that, whatever the problem is will still be there unless we as Democrats and Republicans come together and work on solutions. But I'd like to start by thanking our witnesses for being here today and share their stories and expertise. Losing a loved one to drugs or violence is devastating, and our hearts go out to you and your families. Most of us here are family people, and we can only give you our prayers for the devastating loss that you've incurred. But I want to make sure that the record is clear. Secretary Mayorkas informed the majority last week of his scheduling conflict for today. And I'm sorry if the majority neglected to share that information with our witnesses. I'd also want to make very clear that Democrats are committed to enacting policies that will actually address these issues. Impeaching Secretary Mayorkas will do nothing to prevent other families from suffering similar tragedies. If only it were that simple. These problems are not new. They will require serious policymaking. Not an impeachment vote will do nothing but undermine our constitutional system. If my Republican colleagues were serious about addressing these issues, they would be working on legislation, collaborating with our Senate counterparts and the White House. Right now, Congress has a pending request from President Biden to fund additional Border Patrol agents, additional law enforcement personnel, and increased fentanyl detection technology. House Republicans have refused to consider this request. Instead of pursuing solutions to these problems, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are chasing an illegitimate impeachment and using tragedy to score political points. This entire process has been conducted in bad faith with a predetermined outcome. It's clear from my earlier parliamentary inquiries that the chairman has not established any due process or procedures for this sham of an impeachment, and the majority has refused to work with the department to find a day and time to hear from Secretary Mayorkas, despite his offer to do so. Let's not forget that my Republican colleague forced their border bill, H.R. 2, through this committee without considering any Democratic input, resulting in a bill full of unworkable provisions that would create chaos on the southwest border. They know as well as anyone that H.R. 2 never had a chance of becoming law. Senate Republicans and Democrats are working together in a bipartisan manner and with the direct involvement of Secretary Mayorkas to try to fix the issues raised here today. Yet instead of joining that conversation and using the powers of the Congress to create change, House Republicans are pursuing a partisan impeachment effort that will achieve nothing. Perhaps this is because a bipartisan reform bill would take away from a Republican political talking point. As one Republican member told CNN earlier this month, he has no interest in trying to pass border legislation that might help Joe Biden's approval rating. And that's really what this impeachment sham is all about. A political game to make it seem like the do-nothing Republican caucus achieved something while attacking the Biden administration. And it's the American people that are paying the price of Republican inaction. This impeachment hearing just distracts from the important work that DHS is doing to secure the border and enforce immigration laws. So let me share some of that work. From May to September of 2023, DHS removed or returned at least 360,000 non-citizens from the United States, more than any other 5-month period in the last 10 years. From April 2022 to September 2023, DHS arrested nearly 17,000 suspected human smugglers and seized more than $13 million in currency. And in fiscal year 2023, DHS stopped over 43,000 pounds of fentanyl from entering the country, resulting in over 5,600 arrests. President Biden has requested the necessary funding, but Republicans would rather shut down the entire federal government than give President Biden another win. Mr. Chairman, with other conclusions, what other conclusion can the American people draw but that House Republicans don't actually want to fix the problem on our southern border? The Constitution gives Congress broad and expansive powers to create laws and shape the policies we want to see. It gives us strong tools to perform oversight over the execution of those policies. Yet, that's not what we've seen here today. Those real levels of power don't seem to be flashy enough for my Republican colleagues. They don't want to do the hard work of creating workable laws or collaborating or compromising. It's far easier to demand impeachment. Instead of engaging in a good faith effort to improve Homeland Security, House Republicans are more interested in giving interviews on Fox News. As Professor Pearlstein has explained today, there's no constitutional basis for impeaching Secretary Mayorkas. We heard the same from Professor Bowman last week, and we heard the same from the many other constitutional law experts that have written our committee. There's reason they have not brought a constitutional expert to testify in support of this impeachment. There's no constitutional basis for impeachment. Democrats will continue to keep our focus throughout this sham impeachment on what our obligations are under the Constitution. As I said last week, Mr. Chairman, when your members are ready to work and to use the actual power given to us by the framers to address policy problems, I guarantee you House Democrats will do our best to work with you. But until then, we'll continue to call out this do-nothing approach. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I would like to spend my closing statement reviewing why we've held impeachment proceedings against Secretary Mayorkas, since my Democrat colleagues still don't seem to get it. Secretary Mayorkas has willfully and systematically refused to follow immigration laws written by Congress. Indeed, he has unilaterally created policies that violate the statutory provisions of the immigration laws related to enforcement. In fact, most courts that have actually heard relevant arguments and decided on the merits agree. The problem is, when the arguments on enforcement went to the Supreme Court in the United States versus Texas, the court refused to decide the matter. The court said it was not subject to judicial review, and they pointed Congress to remedy via impeachment. The court said, if the states can't get relief from the courts, they can get relief from Congress, who can impeach the offending official. Well, now Congress is the proper forum to resolve this dispute. We now have to decide, does the legislation enacted by the people's duly elected representatives mean anything? Or can the Secretary just do whatever he wants in direct contradiction to the mandatory language in federal law with impunity? I argue that he cannot continue to not follow the law without consequences. This isn't a policy difference. This is a matter of following the laws written by Congress, and thus a matter of constitutional significance. Today's minority witness recognized back in 2019 that someone could be impeached for a breach of trust. James Madison, the primary architect of the Constitution, was elected to the House of Representatives to serve in the first Congress. At that time, a bill was proposed to create a Department of Foreign Affairs, now the State Department. Concerns were raised that if Congress created such a department, it could be filled by people who abuse the public trust. Madison worried about it, and I quote, the difficulty of displacing those who are unworthy of the public trust, end quote. But he pointed to a solution for that concern. He said on the House floor, and I quote, if an unworthy man be continued in office by an unworthy president, the House of Representatives can at any time impeach him, and the Senate can remove him, whether the president chooses or not. End quote. Now, I don't know about you, but I trust the interpretation of the father of our Constitution more than the interpretation of those desperate to defend the indefensible for political gain. The president has chosen to continue to keep an unworthy man in office, and it is now the duty of the House of Representatives to impeach Secretary Mayorkas and the Senate to remove him from office. The minority witness said we could pass laws to address these issues, but to what end? The Secretary has already shown he will not follow the laws passed by Congress. Secretary Mayorkas has consistently and deliberately violated duly enacted laws under the Immigration and Nationality Act that Congress has put into place to protect Americans and guard our nation's sovereignty. Secretary Mayorkas has refused to comply with court orders regarding those very laws in good faith. Additionally, Secretary Mayorkas has on numerous occasions lied or misled the United States Congress and the American people regarding the existence and scale of the border crisis that he created. Secretary Mayorkas told the House Judiciary Committee on April 2022 that he had operational control of the southern border, according to the definition laid out by the Secure Fence Act. By the way, that definition was passed into law by Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton. And of course, Secretary Mayorkas' own former Border Patrol chief testified before this committee in March of last year that according to the statute, DHS does not have operational control. Secretary Mayorkas' pure dishonesty was on full display. Again, not a policy issue. To those claiming this impeachment hearing is against the Constitution and against the separation of powers, I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas are the ones who have trampled on the Constitution and the separation of powers by ignoring a co-equal branch of government. As far as I understand the Constitution I swore an oath to at age 17 on the plane at West Point, Congress writes the laws and the executive branch executes those laws. But that is exactly, absolutely not what Secretary Mayorkas has been doing when it comes to our country's immigration laws. In fact, he's been spitting on those laws and thus the Constitution in the last 3 years. Impeachment is our final remedy. We're left with no other choice. This is also not a resource issue. Democrats are wrong when they claim that the reason this border crisis is happening is because there aren't enough resources at the border and that Republicans have refused to fund the Border Patrol. First of all, House Republicans have voted substantial increases in funding for CBP above the president's requested amount. In fact, funding the Border Patrol operations and related southwest border requirements increased $2.2 billion since FY 2021. Additionally, House Republicans in the FY 24 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill, where we fund the government, increased border security funding again above the president's proposed budget. On top of this, H.R. 2, the Secure Border Act, would fund a Border Patrol force of 22,000. Yet did any Democrat here vote for that? No. It's the definition of hypocrisy. Secondly, Secretary Mayorkas actually asked for less money each year to fund detention. The one thing that is a deterrent to people coming and making that trek. Third, it won't matter how many resources we have at the border if the policies don't change and follow the laws written by Congress. President Biden's supplemental package would do nothing to secure the border between ports of entry, and it would do nothing to stop the flow of migrants to our border. No, every cent of Biden's supplemental package would go directly toward funding mass catch and release policies. That is a non-starter. That's what's created the crisis in the first place. This is clearly not an issue of funding. DHS has had less funding under the Trump administration for border security, yet our border was far more secure. Funding Biden's supplemental package won't fix the crisis at the border. It will fund it. Again, it's not a funding problem. Secretary Mayorkas' complete disregard for the laws passed by Congress have had a devastating impact. That's what we learned today. Everyone knows the numbers. As one Texas sheriff has said, and I quote, "It's quite frankly a tsunami of death that has crashed into the United States over our southern border. It's killing Americans wholesale, and it's just an epic slaughter manufactured by the cartels. If you don't secure the border, it is going to continue," end quote. Slaughter is the right word to describe what fentanyl is doing to our country, to our young people, to many of our sons and daughters. What else do you call 100,000 overdose deaths in 2021? And a comparison was made earlier today between incarceration rates of native citizens and immigrants. Well, whatever that is, it misses the point that every crime committed by anyone who's here illegally is a completely preventable crime. If you shut the border, those lives are saved. To prevent those crimes, you need only enforce the immigration laws on the books, which is exactly what Secretary Mayorkas is willfully not doing. This hearing is titled Voices for the Victims, the heartbreaking reality of the Mayorkas border crisis. Tammy Nobles' daughter, Kyla Marie Hamilton, no longer has a voice. Josephine Dunn's daughter, Ashley Marie Dunn, no longer has a voice. That's why we held this hearing today. It is our duty to be the voices of those who can't speak for themselves and to demand accountability on their behalf. And finally, to Secretary Mayorkas, who couldn't be bothered to show up today. Secretary Mayorkas, you have one job: follow the laws and secure the homeland. Yet you allow criminal aliens to walk across our border, to spit in the face of our country's laws, and to exploit vulnerable migrants. Secretary Mayorkas, you have one responsibility: follow the law and secure the homeland. Yet you allow massive amounts of fentanyl to flow across the border and poison tens of thousands of Americans. Secretary Mayorkas, you have one duty: to follow the law and secure this homeland. Yet you refuse to let our Border Patrol do its job and keep criminal aliens from coming across the border, or allow ICE to deport all criminal aliens when caught. You had one job, one responsibility, one duty, and you have refused to fulfill it. Over and over again, you have refused to follow the laws and to secure our homeland, yet you shrink your responsibility. This is utterly disgraceful. Now, I'd like to make a few other points. Someone today has made a point, I can't recall if it was a member or the minority witness, that if you remove the secretary, there'll be no change because they'll just put another guy in there like that. Well, I have a duty to the people of Tennessee and the people of America, that if we have a lawless cabinet secretary who refuses to obey the laws written by Congress and who refuses court orders to cease and desist, totally disrespecting the two other equal branches of government in our Constitution, I have a duty under the Constitution to remove him. And it doesn't matter if the devil I don't know is worse than the devil I do. My duty is to remove him, and I will do my duty. There have been some, I think, we'll say disingenuous comments about our efforts to get Mr. Mayorkas here today. We have tried for months and months to get him to come and testify on the border issues. The only time he's come is when he's constitutionally or legally mandated to present the national threats briefing. He came with the director. I was glad he was here for that. He has not worked with me to be here. In fact, today he decided to meet with some Mexican officials who come from Mexico instead of being present at this hearing. That ought to tell you where his priorities are. Now, some people have suggested, of course, that we could pass some more legislation. Well, again, I did say, what's the use if he's not going to abide by it? But you know what? H.R. 2 sits over there on the other side of the building. Well, actually, it's that way. I'm not directionally challenged. It's that way. Amend it. Take the parts you don't like out of it. I think that's the process. And then it comes back over here. We go to conference committee and we work it out. You don't just sit and leave it sitting on a desk and say, you're not writing legislation. Well, yeah, we sent it to you. And the process is you amend it in your committee, vote on that amended version in the Senate, and send it back to conference. So don't sit there and say we haven't done anything. That was months ago. And I have to address the ranking member's suggestion that we would use these young women as political pawns to make a political statement. I am offended by that. His closing remarks could have been made at a political rally. It's despicable to suggest that I would use the two of you as political stunts. I'm trying to show that every American is unsafe right now with these ridiculous border policies. What happened to you ladies and your daughters could happen to any American. And the reason they've happened is because the secretary isn't following the laws passed by this body, both Republicans and Democrats. And if he were a Republican, I'd be saying the exact same thing. It has nothing to do with politics for me. I spent 24 years prepared to give my life for this country. And at times I thought I might have. No, what matters to me is that document that I swore an oath to defend. And this secretary has spit on it by saying that co-equal branches of government don't matter to him. I'm sorry, he's got to go. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittees may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask that the witnesses respond to those in writing pursuant to Committee Rule 7B, hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the ranking member is recognized.
You know, we've talked several times about the rules, and we can disagree. We're Democrats and Republicans. But I call your attention to House rules that you referenced my comments that they were despicable. That's against House rules.
Actually, calling you despicable would be against House rules. Calling your words despicable are not. I can even say it's dishonest what you said. I can't say you're a liar. It's very clear, and I've made that distinction before, actually gaveling down comments made by a Republican. She actually, in that case, called the secretary a liar. She didn't say, others have said that those words are dishonest or that's a lie. You can say that. You can't say the individual is a liar. Her words were despicable. I didn't say anything about you personally.
Well, then I'm clear, as long as you didn't make Benny Thompson.
Yeah, I would never say that about an individual sitting in this committee. But I was very disappointed with your accusation that I would use these individuals as political pawns.
Mr. Chairman, your disappointment is fine. But one of the tenets of who we are as a democracy is that I have an opinion, and you have an opinion, and let's respect that. And so as long as you understand that we can disagree on the words, I was just trying to get clarification about that. And since you say you weren't talking about me specifically, then I'm fine. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The committee stands adjourned.
All right, there you have it, people. All right, other than me accidentally stopping the live stream, I think I actually hit the button. Sorry. Looks like the new modem is working splendid. So now we've got new computer and new modem. I dropped 0 frames, not even one, in 2 hours, 40 minutes. So good. I think we're back in action. Now I'm kind of kicking myself. I didn't take care of this, several weeks ago, but we should be smooth sailing. Knock on wood. I better knock on wood just in case. All right. So subcommittee hearing has now been adjourned. Amazing Disgrace, thank you so much for sticking in with me, and Mimsy and Scott McGinnis stopped in for a while over on the YouTube side. Rumble, you're a little quiet over there, but I understand. I had put up a few points on the other screen, namely the clause of the Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, Clause 2, the invasion clause. There are, on average, daily, crossing our border illegally that we know of. This does not include the gotaways. On average, 12,000. 10,000 to 15,000, average out 12,000 per day. Per day. From 160 different countries. There are 8,500 minors that have come across the border that are unaccounted for. They have no idea where they are. How this can't be a bipartisan agreement, I have no idea. The 2 ladies that were up there again, Miss Nobles, her daughter was killed by an MS-13 gang member. Who was, if they would have just done a cursory check of him, he had tattoos, known gang tattoos, and they still let him across the border. It's disgusting. Miss Josephine Dunn, her daughter Ashley, she died of a fentanyl overdose. Underneath me, that picture of a penny, see the little white powder to the right of that? That's how much fentanyl will kill an adult human, or an adult. It doesn't hardly take anything. She said her daughter took half a tablet of, I can't remember if she said it was Xanax or if it was some kind of like painkiller. She took half of it, and it had twice the amount of fentanyl to kill her laced in it. I did appreciate the fact Mimsy gave me a local Boston illegal who SA'd, because we're on YouTube, someone, and then they let them go. Pierre Lucard Emile let him go, and then he did it again to someone who was disabled. This is just insane. if I can remember to find it, this summer, Glenn Beck had a really great segment on one of his radio shows. I heard it on my way back from the grocery store one day. And I can't remember if it was President Xi or if it was Putin. And they had described an invasion of another country, like how they would go about invading them. And they said we would infiltrate by, X amount over a duration of time. And that's exactly what's happened. Invasion. So there's that. I have so many notes. I also want to find, I looked for it. I was going to play it at the end of this if it didn't get too late, but I can't find it now. Mark Levin, I think it was 2 Sundays ago, had Victor Davis Hanson on with regards to immigration. And they had talked about like the assimilation, the lack of, I should say, of assimilation of these people and how that's contributing to, some of the crisis that we're having. And it's just a nightmare. Just a nightmare. And then actually on Dan Bongino, I'm pretty sure it was today's episode, today or yesterday, one of the people from the left side of the aisle of this subcommittee hearing had talked about a woman and a couple of her children who had died at the hands of border agents. Supposedly, that has been debunked. I was going to look for that, but I can't find it off the top of my head right now. Now tomorrow, now that the internet is working and things seem to be running swimmingly, I am going to tomorrow, I'm guessing probably midday-ish. I am going to go ahead now and do the subcommittee hearing on immigration. I tried to do it yesterday using, well, let's just say it didn't work. I was having trouble, and that's why today I went out and got a new modem. So I'm going to go ahead and do that tomorrow. That'll be an ICYMI, in case you missed it. Subcommittee hearing on immigration. That was the Committee on Oversight and Accountability. It was yesterday. Biden administration regulatory policymaking efforts to undermine U.S. immigration law. The part that I did hear before I just erased it off of the internet because it wasn't working, was very good. So I think that one isn't extremely long, to be honest with you. So that's what's on deck for tomorrow. And like I said, now that we've got, I think, all of our technical glitches hopefully behind us, I'll figure out what else we got going on. And I'm not going to be so afraid to start something. I do appreciate your patience with this live stream. I know there was a point where it did drop, and that was because I actually think I hit the stop streaming button and I don't have the safeguard on it. Are you really sure you want to do this? I think that's what happened. For those of you on the Rumble side, it looked like it just like stopped and then attached again when I fixed it. I can't read that from, let's see, just a moment. Is it here? They would have an ongoing manhunt back in the day. Oh, yeah, I have a hard time with these subcommittee hearings. The reason and again, for those of you who did take the poll I put up, I think it was last week, midweek last week, and asked you normally watch these subcommittee hearings, there was a lot of people that said that they didn't. And there was like 17 people that took the poll. So thank you very much for taking the poll. I've been watching them for years now, and it seems like this is where you're really getting the information. Because, well, especially now that the GOP is in the majority, it does seem like this is where you're getting, well, many conversations that I'll have over the last how long. the things I come up with to mention are usually from these hearings. I normally only do House Judiciary, Oversight, and Homeland Security ones. But there are some of these, they're just really important. You're not getting it from the mainstream media, obviously. Some of the other media outlets, you're getting a little bit on occasion, but even them, I mean, there's a lot of these hearings. And so I just usually pick certain ones. And now again, that the internet is finally working and the computer is all rocking and rolling. I'm going to start doing the Trump rallies. I wanted to do the one last night, but again, I was with that old modem I had, it just wasn't working. So for those of you who like to watch the Trump rallies, I think I can do them on YouTube. I'm not sure. I guess we'll have to give it a whirl. But those are always fun to watch over on Rumble and Kick. So maybe I'll try it over. You know, Right Side Broadcasting seems to have no problem with it. And I usually take the feed right from his Rumble channel, Goat POTUS 45. I have his shirt on. Apparently this camera doesn't go down far enough. The mugshot shirt. All right. Well, I hope you have a wonderful night. It's 11:20 p.m. my time here. And again, I appreciate you putting up with my technical glitches the last couple of weeks. But hopefully those have been resolved. And we'll be back in action. And have a good night, Amazing Disgrace. And everybody else, we will see you, I think, sometime midday tomorrow. So have a blessed evening, everyone.